Welcome to Fantasy Audiobook, Hogwarts, Start Fusion Phoenix Bloodline. Chapter 81. After knocking on the door of the office, Snape opened the door for Peter, and the moment he came in, he whispered comfortably, "I'm on the side, don't worry about what she will do." Peter nodded gratefully at Snape, and followed him inside. At the entrance, I saw Derek and a middle-aged ladylike woman sitting on the sofa. Snape introduced Peter. "This is Mrs. Derek, Derek's mother. She wants to negotiate with you about canceling the report on Derek to the school." Then Snape said to Mrs. Derek with a blank face, "Mrs., you'd better keep the story short. What compensation did you decide to use to distract Mr. York?" Mrs. Derek, wearing a dark green gown, looked at Peter arrogantly, with a gloomy look in her eyes, and then smirked and said, "Mr. York, I heard Derek say you are from the Muggle world. I don't know. What do you want in order to drop the prosecution against Derek?" Seeing her demeanor, Peter directly used the aristocratic face he had not used for a long time. His temperament changed dramatically. He elegantly turned the remaining old chair into a gorgeous armchair, and then used a more arrogant one than her. Looking at Mrs. Derek, she smirked. "After all, Derek used black magic to sneak up on me first. I don't know how, madam, you want to solve it. First of all, I'm not a cat or a dog that can be dismissed at will. Don't try to make me give up the right of prosecution for a small profit, or you can make him prepare to leave school now. Because I will think about Principal Dumbledore after I leave the office and explain this. I don't think he should. A dangerous person who uses black magic and attacks classmates will be kept in school." "You." Mrs. Derek was caught by Peter's demeanor and tone at this time, and stood up directly. She didn't expect to be replied by a dirty mudblood in her eyes. Instantly, murderous intent appeared in her eyes, as if to use a spell at any time. "Mrs. Derek, please calm down. You don't want to be imprisoned in Azkaban for attacking the child," Snape said coldly. He was standing between Peter and Mrs. Derek, a defensive look looks like. When Mrs. Derek saw Snape, fear flashed in her eyes, and she took a deep breath to calm herself down as much as possible. Then he smirked again and said, "Of course not, Snape. I'm the master of the pure-blood Derek family, and of course I won't care about a child." Then he sat down again, and looked at Peter with a cold smile on his face. "What, a child with sharp teeth? How about I give you 1,000 gold galleons? This is a huge sum of money. The expression that you made a lot of money." Peter sneered, looked at her like an idiot, and said, "I don't have more pocket money in Gringotts. Are you sending beggars? Or I'll use the same magic on your son. Try it. Then I'll give you 2,000 galleons. How? You filthy mudblood. How dare you speak to me in such a tone? You have to be careful, don't run around, or one day you may be found dead in some corner. It's a pity that you have such a white face." Madame Derek said in a rage, directly and coldly, looking at the boy in front of her with her eyes fixed. "Madam, are you threatening my students? It seems that today's negotiation was unsuccessful. If you have nothing to do next, please leave the school. Hogwarts does not allow outsiders to stay long," Snape said firmly. Derek was a little anxious when he saw this situation. He didn't want to be expelled from school, so he took his mother's hand and said anxiously, "Mom, he likes magic books. Don't we have a lot of magic books at home? Can give him some books. I don't want to be fired." Mrs. Derek looked at the silly son in front of her, and then looked aside, whether it was her appearance, temperament, or the momentum she had just competed with herself, all of which were different from other mudbloods, and suddenly felt that she was born wrong. She is not one of those poor people who only sell magic books from sellers. She knows that these magic books are the heritage of a family. They are the knowledge accumulated by the ancestors for hundreds of years and generations. So she can't say anything. Agree with this stupid idea. But Peter said at this time, "I don't want any gin galleon, I just want your family's magic books. If we agree, we can sign an agreement. But if we don't agree, don't waste any more time. You can go for Derek first. Tidy up and wait to be fired. Why don't you go grab it?" Mrs. Derek roared, as if to strangle the hateful boy in front of him, and then discussed it. "How about 5,000 gold galleons? This is already the money we can come up with. As for the magic book, it is impossible. You are a little wizard from Muggle, and you are not afraid of dying." Peter sat on the chair with an innocent expression and spread his hands. "Robbery is not so easy. So what's your final decision? If it doesn't work, I'll leave first. I still have the activities of the spell club in the evening. Mrs. Derrick looked at her son's pleading look, and finally gritted her teeth and said, then give you a magic book. And it's a duplicate copy. And you have to swear not to publish the contents of the book. Peter looked at her like an idiot and said, one book? You're joking. Ask your son. After my duel with Carlson Earl won, Earl promised me 5 copies. The only magic book. And you want to kill me with 1 copy? Mrs. Derrick looked at her son and saw her nodding. She immediately scolded the Earl family. She couldn't help but grit her teeth and said, then we will also give you 5 magic books. Is that all right? Peter shook his head. I had a fair duel with Earl, and he took 0 copies of the only one, and yours is only a copy, so you must compensate for 10 copies. Impossible, you are extorting. I will not do what you want. Mrs. Derrick directly and resolutely disagreed. Well, it seems that we can't agree. Peter looked indifferent, then got up and nodded to Snape, as if he was about to leave. If that's the case, then please allow me to leave first. A smile flashed in Snape's eyes, and he agreed calmly, then you go first. Dang Brydor should be in the headmaster's office. When Derek saw this, he pulled his mother in panic and said, Mom, you promise. Isn't it just 10 magic books, just give him. I don't want to be fired. Peter walked steadily, and when he opened the door and one foot was already stretched out, there was a voice behind him, I promise. With a smile on Peter's face at the door, he turned around and asked with a smile, Madam, are you sure you agreed, not fooling me? Mrs. Derrick had a gloomy face, nodded her head a little dejectedly, her eyes were so wicked that she seemed to be swallowing him up, and she said with difficulty, I agree to exchange 10 copies of the magic book in exchange for Mr. York to cancel the prosecution of Derek. 5. Peter said happily, if that's the case, then ask Madam to sign a magic contract with me. How about the unbreakable curse? Mrs. Derrick was stunned and said with an embarrassed expression, you are going to use the unbreakable curse for a few magic books. This is ridiculous. Peter looked at Mrs. Derrick with a smile, and said, I'm not afraid that you will fill up some books that are not unique, or deliberately add, delete, and modify the books, and then hand them over to me. If the content of the magic books is not rigorous, it is easy to cause an accident, and if it is serious, it will die. I don't want to gamble with my own life. Mrs. Derrick seemed to have been told, and her face became more gloomy. She did not expect this mudblood from the Muggle world to be so difficult. She said with difficulty, okay, I agree to sign the unbreakable charm. Peter smiled contentedly, and he turned to Snape and said, Professor, you should know this spell, I want you to be our witness. Snape looked at Peter with complex eyes. The boy was in control of the situation from beginning to end, and the arrogant Mrs. Derrick finally agreed. It's hard to believe he's just a kid. He walked forward silently, took out his wand, pointed at the two, and asked again, are you sure you want to sign this unbreakable curse? If you don't do it, the party who breaches the contract will be killed by the curse backlash. Peter is the beneficiary, of course, nodding happily. Mrs. Derrick wanted to go back on it, but in the face of her only son's request, she couldn't help but refuse, so both parties agreed. The unbreakable charm was not complicated. The two sides reached out and shook hands. Snape, who was a witness, pointed at them with his wand and recited the spell, and then a blood-colored light enveloped the two of them. The content of the agreement between the two parties is not too complicated. Peter asked the other party to provide him with a copy of the 10 copies of the magic book, and he was not allowed to do anything. On the other hand, Derek asked Peter that after he got the magic book, he could no longer hold Derek for sneak attack with black magic matter. With the signing of the contract, the red light turned into 2 red threads and disappeared around the wrists of both parties, leaving only a light-colored trace to remind the contract. Okay, the contract is signed. As long as the two sides complete the agreement, the contract will have no effect on anyone. Snape put away his wand and explained to Peter. As soon as the contract was signed, Mrs. Derrick immediately withdrew the hand she held with Peter, her face full of disgust as if it was stained with dirt. Peter smiled, ignoring her attitude. He is very happy now, and has 10 more magic books in his account, which is a big gain. The Pure Blood family has been able to occupy a dominant position in the wizarding world for a long time. In addition to money, it is the profound magical knowledge they have accumulated from generation to generation. Just as the Ollivanders have always had a firm grasp on wand-making skills, their wands are more powerful than anyone else's. And the Potion Family Prince, that is, Snape's mother's family, has a lot of potions that are handed down from the family, and it is the dream prescription of many potion masters. Many pure blood families hold their magical knowledge firmly in the hands of the family and do not share it with the outside world. Even in the Lishan bookstore, which claims to be the most complete magic book in the UK, the books it sells are the most basic magic knowledge, and some advanced magic books will not appear here. Just like the standard spells book compiled by Miranda Goshik, a must-have book for Hogwarts students in grades 1 to 7. But in fact, there are many advanced spells in the standard spells, originally compiled by Goshok. But the Ministry of Magic, in the name of the dangers of these spells, confiscated all orphaned copies of the first edition. Then had Miranda Goshik remake a standard spell with most of the content cut out for publication. And those confiscated orphaned copies have all entered the bookcases of the major pure blood families and will not be displayed to the public. Miranda Goshik once expressed dissatisfaction with this. She is a pure scholar. In order to compile this magic book, she added many spells of the Goshik family in it, just to share this knowledge. In the end, these books all went into the hands of the pure blood family, making her hard work go to waste. The knowledge of the magic world is very precious, and all families can't wait to hide their family magic. The reason why the 4 founders who founded Hogwarts are admired is because they selflessly dedicated their magical knowledge and skills to the little wizards who came to learn for free in that era. Compared to the pure-blooded family who are still stingy today, they are extraordinarily noble. Even the notorious Salazar Slytherin, known as the Dark Wizard, who was born into the Slytherin family, contributed his family's magic to the establishment of Hogwarts. The first batch of magic books in the Hogwarts library was contributed by the 4 founders, and then slowly accumulated to the current volume of books on this basis. But there is still a lot of magical knowledge controlled by pure blood families that has not been incorporated into the library. So Peter is looking forward to the books that are treasured by these pure blood families. After signing the contract, Mrs. Derrick, with a gloomy face, pulled Derrick to the fireplace, grabbed a handful of flow powder by the fireplace, and said to Snape, "Professor Snape, I'll take Derrick home tonight first. When he comes back tomorrow, I will let him bring 10 magic books." After speaking, he walked directly to the fireplace, threw flow powder at his feet and shouted, "Derrick Manor." The 2 disappeared into the fireplace directly accompanied by a burst of green flames. After watching the 2 of them leave, Snape raised his eyebrows and said to Peter, "It seems that you can succeed even without me today. You are very good to be able to suppress the momentum of a pure blood family controller. It seems that the branch had and are not wrong." After Derrick's family left, Peter's aura subsided and returned to the appearance of a little boy. He said humbly, "Actually, I was able to negotiate successfully because of your existence, Professor, so she didn't dare to go too far. Ellen White gave me. I said that Mrs. Derrick was a Death Eater, and if it wasn't for teaching you, I wouldn't be so confident." Snape was stunned for a moment, his eyes dimmed a little. "Death Eaters? Aren't you afraid that I will be bought by them?" Peter noticed Snape's mood change and guessed he was thinking about his own Death Eater status. His eyes crossed the hand hidden in the black robe without a trace. Then he smiled and said, "How is it possible, Professor? You are a master of potions, and you are the dean of our academy. Of course I believe you." Peter got up and said goodbye to Snape. Professor Flitwick invited me to join the spell club. I need to join, please allow me to say goodbye first." Snape waved and motioned for him to leave. And finally said, "Since you know that Mrs. Derrick is a Death Eater, you must be vigilant against her. You have offended her, and her previous threats may become true. So if you don't want to die, don't run around. Do you know?" "Got it, Professor. Thanks for the reminder," Peter said solemnly. After leaving the potions office, Peter went to the auditorium for dinner. The club's time was 7 o'clock in the evening, and it was already 6:30. As soon as he came to Slytherin's long table, many people took the initiative to greet him, and some people greeted him cordially. Peter sat down beside Alan in a bit of shock. Today's dish was Italian food. Peter took out a piece of pizza, a piece of macaroni, and Italian-style grilled fish from the big plate, and hurriedly ate it. Seeing the surprised expression of his roommate, Alan asked with a smile, "Do you feel that the people at Slytherin treat you differently today than they used to be?" Peter nodded as he ate. That's because they saw your strength and talent from the duel. Alan said sharply, although Slytherin pays attention to blood, the most important thing is strength. Wandless magic reverses the situation and makes them feel that you are a very worthwhile target. That's why they change their attitude. Suddenly, Peter didn't have a problem with this kind of behavior, because many people do it. Since they want to befriend themselves, of course he will not refuse, although he will not regard these people as true friends, but at least they are better than enemies. Prefect Chris Jones came up to Peter and said with a smile, "Congratulations on your entry into the Spells Club. Flitwick should have told you that I am also a member of the club. The club time is at the Ravenclaw Public Library at 7 o'clock, I need me waiting for you." After Peter swallowed the food in his mouth, he said, "Thank you, Senior Jones. You don't have to wait for me, I'll be there in a while, you go first." Chris Jones nodded and said kindly, "You can call me Chris, there are only 2 Slytherin students in the club, and we will take care of each other in the future. By the way, Ravenclaw does not have a password, so if you want to get in, you have to answer the questions on the door panel, and you will be allowed to enter if you answer correctly. You should answer it easily. Don't worry if the answer is wrong, just wait and you can come in with the Ravenclaw students." "Thank you, Chris, I'll remember it," Peter said gratefully. In fact, he already knew this, but since it was someone else's kindness, then it's good to go. Prefect Chris Jones left with satisfaction. Alan White looked at Peter enviously and said, "The Spell Club, if you didn't say it, I wouldn't even know that this club existed. Professor Flitwick only invited you and Chris Jones, obviously this is a man with only spell talent. A club that only high people can enter. Tell me when you come back, I don't know what Ravenclaw is like." Peter agreed to Alan. Seeing that the time was a little short, he hurriedly accelerated the speed of eating, but the habit he had developed for a long time made him still look elegant at this time, and he couldn't see the anxious look at all. After finishing the food, Peter hurried to the Ravenclaw Tower with his schoolbag. Hurry up to the top of the tower. He walked to a door with an eagle-shaped bronze knocker, picked it up and knocked. Immediately, a gentle female voice came from the bronze door knocker and asked, "Is the phoenix first or the flame first?" When Peter heard this question, he raised his eyebrows at random and replied, "The 2 are circular, with no starting point." "Makes sense." The gentle voice sounded again, and the door opened immediately. Peter guessed that this voice should be Rowena Ravenclaw's voice, "It's really good." Coming to the lounge, instead of the Slytherin green and silver trim, blue and bronze are the dominant tones, and the walls are hung with silk drapery in both colors. The dome ceiling is painted with stars, and the dark blue carpet below is also full of stars, in contrast to each other. There are tables, chairs and bookcases all around. And next to the door leading to the dormitory, stands a statue of Rowena Ravenclaw made of white marble. The statue is very beautiful, with a crown on its head, which is engraved with, "Superhuman wisdom is the greatest wealth of mankind." Peter bowed respectfully to Ms. Ravenclaw. This wise lady has implemented her thoughts without setting secret words. As long as she can answer the questions set for her, Ravenclaw welcomes anyone. "I'm glad you recognized Ms. Ravenclaw," Professor Flitwick's voice came from behind Peter. Peter turned to look at Flitwick in surprise. "When did you come, Professor Flitwick? I didn't even notice you." Flitwick looked at Peter with satisfaction, then looked at the statue behind Peter, and said with a sigh, "You are the first person I saw who bowed to Ms. Ravenclaw. When many people came to the lounge, their eyes you will be attracted by the surrounding scenery, so you will not notice the power of a line." Peter looked at Professor Flitwick, who was only about his waist, and said with a calm expression, "I agree with Rowena Ravenclaw's statement that superhuman wisdom is the greatest wealth of mankind. Because whether in the Muggle world or the magical world, only knowledge will not leave you. Human beings rely on extraordinary wisdom to stand above all things. Even in the magical world, many magical animals are more powerful than wizards, but in the end, wizards stand at the top. Because we learn and create a lot of magic with wisdom. And extraordinary wisdom requires the constant supply of knowledge." Hearing Peter's words, Professor Flitwick applauded happily and said regretfully, "It's a pity that you are not a student of our college. Many Ravenclaw students have never understood your opinion, and they are blindly immersed in it. In the book but never tried to get anything, became a nerd in the eyes of other colleges. But forgot the meaning of Ravenclaw as, greedy raven. It is an endless demand for knowledge. Instead of holding a book or 2, Peter smiled and comforted. Since Ms. Ravenclaw has set the door of the lounge to ask questions, it means that she welcomes all intelligent people, and doesn't care which house it is. Although I am not a student of Ravenclaw House, I am still Hogwarts. A member of, and also your student. Flitwick laughed and said relievedly, "You are right. Although many people say that Ms. Hufflepuff is the kindest, and is willing to accept many wizards that other colleges do not accept. But Ms. Ravenclaw is not so much. She welcomes anyone who seeks knowledge and wisdom. Let's go, the other students should be here, let's go to the library that belongs to Ravenclaw." Flitwick led Peter to a small arched door opposite the window, and said to him proudly, "Many people don't knowing that our college has a private library. Although it is small in size, it has a collection of books comparable to the Hogwarts library. I saw a library that is comparable to the size of the lounge space inside the small door. Although it is not as large as the library, many books are densely piled together, and the books basically occupy half of the space. It seems a bit crowded." Many Ravenclaw students stood quietly in the aisle, picked out the books they wanted to read, and sat silently on the long table by the wall to read. Following Professor Flitwick through the long and narrow aisle, Peter looked at the books around him in surprise, and there was one more place for him to score points in the future. With the amount of books in the two libraries, he may not be able to learn it for decades. Seeing Peter's surprise, Flitwick smiled and said, "The books here are all left by previous students. Many students learn from each other and summarize their knowledge and leave it here. There are also many books donated by alumni, and even there's Ms. Ravenclaw's lab notes. So feel free to come here and read the book if you want to read it later. But after you read it, you must leave your opinion or summary, and the principle of knowledge equivalent exchange is followed here." Peter was amazed and admired the vision of the person who came up with this solution. If this goes on, the amount of knowledge in Ravenclaw's private library will probably gather more and more. Everyone will learn the corresponding knowledge from Ravenclaw, and then return a piece of knowledge to it. It really fits the meaning of the greedy raven. The pursuit of knowledge is really endless. Professor Flitwick told him that Rowena Ravenclaw also came up with this method. At the end of the Ravenclaw library, Professor Flitwick stopped on a wall. There is no door here. The blue wall is painted with a raven, which reads, "Superhuman wisdom is the greatest wealth of mankind." Flitwick turned to Peter and said, "Here is the entrance. You need to put your wand on the raven and say, 'Knowledge is the ladder of human progress.' The entrance to the club will appear." Peter asked in surprise, could that be what Ms. Ravenclaw said? Flitwick smiled and shook his head. "This is what a student from the Muggle community in our college said. We think it makes sense, so we continue to use it." "Peter, you are also from the Muggle community, you should have heard this sentence." Peter nodded and said, "This sentence was originally said by a Russian named Gorky. The original words were, 'Books are the ladder of human progress,' and later it gradually became, 'Knowledge is the ladder of human progress.'" Flitwick exclaimed, "Although Muggles do not have the help of magic, their pursuit of wisdom and knowledge has far surpassed that of wizards. Are you ready? We'll meet the other members soon. You're my first freshman, and they're already very curious about you," Flitwick said with a smile. Under the professor's encouraging eyes, Peter held his wand against the raven on the wall and said, "Knowledge is the ladder of human progress." As soon as the voice fell, the raven came to life and flew away from the spot, leaving a blank space to become a passage. Peter half hunched into the passage, and after walking a few dozen steps, AC/DC suddenly became enlightened. He had come to a very spacious room with huge glass windows on three sides. It was very bright and could see far into the distance through the windows. Black Lake and Forbidden Forest. In the room, on the left half against the wall, there is a rectangular wooden competition table, very similar to the duel table that was transformed by the prefect during Peter's duel. On the right half, there is a round wooden table in the middle surrounded by rows of sofas. At this time, 9 students were sitting on the sofa, looking at Peter who had just come in with interest. Flitwick followed closely, walked in, and then pulled Peter to introduce to the crowd. "This is Peter York, a first-year Slytherin student, who is very talented in magic, and will follow us to learn and explore the knowledge of magic spells." A Ravenclaw girl frowned and said, "Professor, is it a bit hasty for you to invite a freshman to join the club? We usually discuss advanced spells, and he may not understand it as a first year." Flitwick did not get angry because of the student's doubts, but explained kindly, "Don't underestimate him. Although Peter is only a first year, he has already learned the knowledge of the first year. And he has the advanced magic super armor that can cast iron armor spells. Guard. This is what I've seen with my own eyes, very standard, and resists several hex attacks," Flitwick said exaggeratedly, and winked at Peter. Peter saw Professor Flitwick's expression, and immediately understood that when he hung Derek and Thomas, Professor Flitwick was still there. Slytherin Prefect Chris Jones, who was sitting on the sofa, also attested, "Peter fought a duel with a fourth-year student from our house, and won the opponent easily. And he can cast spells without a stick. Very good." When the others heard it, they looked at Peter in surprise, and it was hard to believe that the person they were talking about was the little boy in front of him. "Okay, let's all sit down." Although Professor Flitwick was the shortest among the people present, he was the most imposing. "Peter, sit down with Jones, you are both from the same college and should be able to chat." "Sit here," Chris Jones greeted Peter. "I've always sat on this sofa by myself, and now you're here." After sitting down, Peter looked at all the members curiously, and then found a person he knew, Percy Weasley, a third-year Gryffindor, who was sitting across from him at this time. Startled for a moment, then nodded. Peter looked at the older brother of the Weasley twins and said, "Percy, can I call you like this? Are you the only Gryffindor? I think most of the people here are from Ravenclaw." Percy Weasley knew that he, the Slytherin who played well with his twin brother, shook his head and said, "Gryffindor and my brother Charlie, but he can't come today." Peter almost choked on his saliva when he heard it, and Charlie Weasley was knocked unconscious by Slytherin's batter in the morning. Isn't he still lying in the school infirmary? He felt a little embarrassed for a moment, so he had to give up and continue talking, and it seemed that Percy Weasley didn't want to talk to him too much. Peter turned to Prefect Jones and asked, "Chris, what did Professor Flitwick usually talk about before? I only brought the standard spell book, and I don't know what else to bring." "You don't actually need to bring anything. We usually discuss the use of a certain spell, and everyone is like at a tea party, talking about new spells, or simplifying the steps to use spells. It's not too much." "Seriously." Chris reached out and patted Peter on the shoulder. Then he said excitedly, "Sometimes when the interest comes, Professor Flitwick will teach us dueling skills. He was a duel champion when he was young. See the wooden platform on the other side, that is what Professor Flitwick used to teach us duels. Place." Professor Flitwick walked to the middle position, and a floating spell floated himself to the table. Even if he stood on the wooden table, he was only level with the students sitting on the sofa, but no one would laugh at him. Height. "Let's warmly welcome Peter York to our club again," Professor Flitwick said happily, then held up his wand directly, and a stream of ribbons of flowers shot from the tip of the wand and fell around. Peter brushed the petals off his shoulders and asked Chris beside him in surprise, "Does Professor Flitwick often be so surprised?" "It's never been so grand. It seems that Professor Flitwick values you very much," Chris Jones also said with a look of surprise. "In view of the new members joining today, we will have a special welcome ceremony tonight." Professor Flitwick flicked his wand and screamed and cheered, "It's a duel match, everyone will participate." When they heard that it was a duel match, everyone cheered, and more people liked this kind of practical class than the discussion in words. A Ravenclaw boy with a more active temper even hugged Professor Flitwick on the table excitedly. "Lauren, let me down," Flitwick yelled sharply, but with a smile on his face, no reproach. The boy named Lauren took Professor Flitwick to the competition stage and looked at him expectantly. Seeing his expression, Flitwick said with a smile, "In view of Lauren's disrespectful behavior just now, I will punish him for the last round." "Oh no," Alan pleaded with an unacceptable expression of pain. "Professor, I was wrong, you'd better let me play first. You also know that I don't have that much patience, waiting for this long, it will be tortured to death. No, it's time for you to grind your temper and frizz all day long." Flitwick refused with a smile. Everyone was amused by this boy. Seeing Peter being curious about this boy, Chris explained in a low voice, "His name is Lauren Goshik, a 7th grader at Ravenclaw. Don't look at his frizzy appearance, but he is very talented in spells, and he is Professor Flitwick. One of my favorite students." "That's the Goshik you thought. His grandmother is Miranda Goshik, the editor of our standard spell book for grades 1 to 7. Seeing Peter's expression of wanting to ask after thinking of something, Chris said directly, said. Peter looked at this lively Ravenclaw student in surprise. It turned out that there was still genetic talent. He was very curious about the performance of this Goshik. We just had 10 people here today, and we can just divide into 2 groups. I am the referee, and everyone can combine freely. Professor Flitwick stood on the stage and announced to everyone. Everyone started to form their own groups, but Peter was too young, so the seniors ignored him, and even Chris was directly invited by a Ravenclaw girl to form a team. There was only Percy Weasley, a third-year student in the second smallest, standing there as alone as Peter. Flitwick looked at the two and said, "Oh, Mr. Weasley, you are Peter's opponent today." The two stood together with big eyes and small eyes, especially Percy Weasley, pursed his lips and said nothing. He thought that he was 2 years older than Peter, and even if he won, he would not be able to win. As for the previous Flitwick, when the professor complimented Peter, he didn't take it seriously. "Let's play a group first, and show our new members how to duel," Flitwick said, looking at the 10 students in the audience. Then, ignoring Lauren Goshik, who had been raising his hands high, he pointed to the 2 6th graders beside him. "Alex and Magellan, come up and show the new members." The 2 people who were called came to the stage happily and stood opposite each other on both sides of the wooden platform. "Come on, first bow to each other," said Flitwick, standing between the 2. Hearing the words, the 2 slowly came to the middle position, raised their wands and bowed to each other. Then turn around and walk to both sides, and when you reach a suitable position, turn around instantly and use your wand to face each other. Remember, gentlemen, that our duel matches can only use the contents of the standard spell book, and can't use other spells, let alone powerful curses," Flitwick said with a serious face. Then with a spark from the tip of the wand, Flitwick screamed, "Go!" As soon as the words fell, the 2 6th grade students standing on both sides directly chanted the spell, "Remove your weapon." Look, they both chose the disarming spell at the beginning. In fact, when we were dueling, the most effective way was to launch the disarming spell. In this way, the opponent's spell can be removed as quickly as possible, and victory can be scheduled by then. "That's it," Professor Flitwick explained excitedly. "This is not necessarily." Standing beside the female opponent of choice, Chris shook his head and said, "Isn't what the professor said incorrect? I took the wand, and I couldn't cast a single spell. Isn't it already scheduled to win?" The Ravenclaw girl next to Chris frowned, feeling that Chris was finding fault. Chris looked at the girl's expression and explained, "It's true in general, but it's not very useful when you meet some guys." He pointed to Peter, who was watching the game on the side, and said, "His guy, he was caught in front of him." The man disarmed his wand, and as a result, he directly cast a spell without a wand and recalled the wand, turning defeat into victory. At that time, all Slytherin people were shocked to drop their jaws. The girl was surprised when she listened to Chris's words and looked in disbelief. They began to learn silent spellcasting in 6th and 7th grade, but in fact very few of them were really successful. At most, on basic spells such as floating spells, silent spellcasting was successfully achieved. As for wandless magic, it is the patent of very few wizards, and wizards like Professor Flitwick, who are second only to Dumbledore's strength, only know a few simple wandless magic, but they are proud enough. After all, great wizards like Dumbledore and Voldemort can't cast spells completely without wands. The fight on the stage was very exciting. Both of them were seniors, and both were invited to join the club by Flitwick because of their extraordinary talents, so even under the restrictions of the rules, they could only use basic spells. But still able to constantly change the spell, while constantly dodging, the two are evenly matched. In the end, because one of the students wanted to be handsome, he was directly disarmed by the opponent and disarmed his wand. Clap, clap, clap. Everyone applauds the wonderful showdown between the two. The students who lost were not unhappy, and they walked down the stage happily with their opponents. "Very good, Alex and Magellan have contributed a wonderful duel for us," Flitwick said excitedly, changing the subject. Of course, if Alex can forget his narcissistic instinct, even more so. "All right." Alex, who lost the duel just now, did not feel ashamed at all, narcissistically smoothed his hair to one side, and then said cheekily, "Professor, you know this is impossible, my hairstyle is much more important than this." Quote. Everyone laughed. This Alex and Goshik in Ravenclaw are known as the funny duo, one is sloppy, the other is narcissistic, but they are all very good, occupying the first place in their respective grades all the year round. Name location. Flitwick shook his head helplessly, then looked at the audience. Okay, the demonstration group has been completed, then we will invite our new member Peter and third-year Weasley to play the second game. Then he specifically looked at Peter. Remember, you can't use spells other than standard spell textbooks, especially advanced spells such as super armor and body protection. Go. On the stage, Peter and Percy Weasley looked at each other. I won't let you, Percy said, looking at Peter, his eyes full of desire for victory. Peter was a little stunned. Unlike the other members of the Weasley family, this Percy was ambitious and perhaps more suitable for Slytherin. Excellent grades, very hungry for power. In the original timeline, he successfully entered the Ministry of Magic after graduation in Harry Potter's 4th grade Goblet of Fire, but gradually lost himself in the pursuit of power, and even stood in the Ministry of Magic for a time, breaking with his family. In the end, it was only when the Ministry of Magic fell and the people betrayed each other that he came to his senses, returned home to admit his mistake, and finally reconciled with his family. In the final battle, relying on his high attainments in magic spells, he defeated the Death Eaters in a row. At this time, Percy was not the future student council president. He was only 2 years older than Peter in the 3rd grade, but he had already shown his desire for power. Yes, I kept writing letters to the president of the student council during the summer vacation asking how to become a prefect. The flattering tone of 020 almost made me vomit. Okay, both sides start bowing, then back to both sides, and when I say start, fire the spell. Professor Flitwick stood in the middle this time, trying to ensure the safety of the duel between the two. After the two bowed obediently to each other, they quickly walked to the corresponding positions, picked up their wands and confronted each other. Go, Professor Flitwick shouted. Peter did not underestimate Percy Weasley. Although this guy has excess power, he will be admitted to the Ministry of Magic with 12 O's excellent. In the future, becoming the second person to get 12 O's after Bill Weasley, students with grades. After he directly cast the disarming charm twice in a row, he jumped off the ground and erected the iron armor charm on himself to resist Percy's attack. Percy deserved to be a student who could be invited by Professor Flitwick. He nimbly avoided Peter's 2 disarming charms, and then directly set up an iron armor charm for himself. Iron spells are part of the 5th grade curriculum, but Percy apparently uses them too. Although it still looks a little unfamiliar, it is already very powerful compared to many adult wizards who can't even cast a decent iron armor spell. However, in comparison, Percy at this time was still very immature, especially when Peter killed a group of 8-eyed giant spiders in the Forbidden Forest in the afternoon, so Peter, who had changed his mind, seemed very resolute at this time. Without pausing, after several consecutive disarming spells and petrification spells, a silent stun spell was mixed in, directly hitting Percy who was unprepared, causing him to fall asleep. Flitwick watched the whole time, and as soon as he saw Percy being hit by the spell, he cast a spell to keep the sleepy Percy from falling heavily, and then used the quick recovery spell to wake him up. What a wonderful scene. Peter York hit his opponent with a silent stunning charm after firing a burst of disarming charms and won. Flitwick said happily, then looked at Percy, who was disappointed. Of course, our Mr. Weasley is also very good, he can counterattack in time after dodging Peter's magic attacks in a row. Even if I am not careful, I may be hit. What's more, Peter York uses silent casting. Let we applaud them. Clap clap. The onlookers applauded sincerely. Even Percy Weasley, who lost, didn't have such strength at the same age. Not to mention Peter York, who is only in the 1st grade now, directly made them feel the huge gap. They are still working hard to contact the silent spell, but they did not expect that a first-year student would have completed this goal earlier than them. Peter stepped down with the lost Percy and continued to watch the other seniors play. Suddenly, a look of joy appeared on Peter's face. It turned out that the system rewarded him with 5 points for the duel match just now. He didn't expect to be able to get so many points in just one match, which is equivalent to the content of 5 books he read carefully. Points earned. Watching the duel on the field, Peter's eyes lit up, and now he can't wait to jump on the stage to play a few more games and earn enough points. The next few games are very exciting. These senior students are the most talented people in magic spells. Even the simplest spells, they can use tricks, and their power is no worse than advanced spells. For example, one of the students of Hufflepuff in the 7th grade, he made him perfect with just a floating spell, and finally directly floated the opponent in midair, constantly spinning somersaults, directly making the opponent unable to bear and choosing to admit defeat. In the end, it was Lauren Goshak's turn and his opponent. Both were 7th graders, but Lauren's strength was obviously superior. His spellcasting speed and uninterrupted spellcasting far surpassed everyone else's. You can even turn the released spell to avoid the armor spell in front. His opponent was obviously aware of this ability, and he was well prepared, but he was still embarrassed by this arc-shaped casting trajectory. Because the iron armor spell couldn't fully work, he could only keep jumping and dodging the spell's attack. But in the end, because of lack of physical strength, he was hit by a petrification spell. Thank you two for showing us a wonderful duel. We saw that Lauren Goshak's spell casting skills are very difficult to deal with. Even if we release the iron armor spell in advance, Lauren's magical attack can turn, making it hard to prevent. His opponent is also restricted by the rules, and there is no way to effectively resist the attack. Flitwick explained excitedly. After watching these few games, Peter felt that his horizons had broadened a lot. He used to learn magic, and he was pursuing high-level magic spells with great power, and he only needed to be able to use basic spells. But obviously he was wrong. These senior students may not be able to match Peter Zero in advanced spells and even wandless casting. But in terms of skill, Peter at this time is a long way from them. Under the restrictions of the rules, these senior students can still use the basic spells to perfection, use the least magic power consumption, and play the most beautiful victory. And Peter is only using magic superficially. If he wants to go further on the road of magic in the future, he must study those basic spells that he ignores, instead of blindly pursuing powerful spells. Peter somehow understood why Professor Flitwick held a duel match when he first came to the club. I am afraid that he has found that Peter has gone astray in the spell. After all, these days, Peter is almost only staring at the advanced spells on the spell notes, completely ignoring the basic spell knowledge in the previous part. And these senior students have their own views on magic spells and certain attainments, especially after the rules are defined. The use of magic skills is more prominent among senior students. This also provides guidance for Peter's future research direction of magic spells, instead of having no direction at all like before. But it wasn't the time for Peter to think about this, when he saw Lauren Goshak standing proudly on the stage and said, "Who else is going to challenge me? If I win, I taught him that magic corner trick just now." Professor Flitwick asked in surprise, "Lauren, are you serious? You must know that such spellcasting skills are very important, and you are willing to give them." Lauren said indifferently, "My grandma said that knowledge can only be brought to life when it is shared, instead of hiding it and waiting for it to decay. That's why she spent a lot of time and energy compiling the original version of standard spells. It's just a pity that it was the Ministry of Magic confiscated it, and it went into the belly of those greedy people," Lauren said with a disgusting expression on her face. "Alas, Miranda is indeed a very respectable lady. The standard spell book she gave me is still treasured by me. I really hope her spell book can be seen again," Flitwick said with a sigh. The magical world is closed-minded, and the pure-blooded families all want to take magic as their own, and even covet other people's magical knowledge. Open-minded people like Miranda Goshak who are willing to share their magic with others are attacked by them as aliens. Flitwick retracted his thoughts, smiled and said to the people in the audience, "Since Lauren has said so, who of you are willing to come up and challenge him? It doesn't matter if you lose, as long as you win, you can get his spellcasting skills. Very rare thing." The people in the audience looked at each other and were eager to move. They all knew the importance of these spellcasting skills. Of course, they didn't have much confidence. They had been with each other for at least a year and knew each other's strength. "Can I try it?" A clear voice came. Everyone looked around and saw that Peter raised his hand. Professor Flitwick was also a little surprised and asked, "Peter, are you sure? There are no rules for this competition. Lauren is a 7th grade student, and he has a family background. He can use almost all spells. You're advanced spells but there is no advantage." Peter said shyly, "Professor, I want to try. These days I am a little too pursuing those powerful spells. But now the seniors have given me a different point of view, so I want to experience their magic. When Flitwick heard this, he looked at him with great relief. It's good for you to think so. These days I've watched you continue to study those advanced magics, and I feel a little regretful that I gave you my spell notebook too soon, worrying that you will just keep going. Pursue those powerful spells. Since you want to experience their strength, then compare with Lauren. It doesn't matter if you lose. After all, he is about to graduate and is already an adult wizard. Flitwick said happily. Oh, Professor, did you give him the spell notebook so early? I begged you for 2 years before you lent me the notebook. It's so unfair. Lauren Goshik complained with a funny-faced ow, and was also surprised that Professor Flitwick attached great importance to Peter. You impatient guy, you can't stop sooner or later like a sniff. If I gave you the spell note early, I would thank Merlin if you didn't blow up the Ravenclaw Tower. Flitwick laughed and scolded. Obviously he was talking Lauren is very close. Okay, since Peter raised his hand first, let him compete with Lauren. Flitwick announced, then looked at Lauren and asked with a smile, what's your opinion? The graders challenge you. Lauren looked at the little boy below and said with a smile, I said just now that I will accept everyone's challenges, and of course he is no exception. Don't worry, Professor, I will return you a sound Peter York. Then he bowed his head and said to Peter, little brother, don't worry. I won't use those dangerous magics. You have to do your best. Obviously he was very confident in his own strength, but he just thought that training with him would be taken care of new member. I'll do my best, Peter said shyly, looking harmless. This made Chris Jones, who had seen Peter's majesty in Slytherin, twitch at the corners of his mouth. He always felt that Lauren would suffer this time. Although Flitwick knew that Peter could master the upgraded version of the iron armor spell, as well as a few wandless magic, he also felt that Peter had no chance of winning, so when Peter came to the stage, he reached out and patted him on the shoulder, comforting, this time I will do it. It's to gain experience. Don't worry, although Lauren is usually reckless, she is very reliable at critical times and won't hurt you. On the stage, Peter and Lauren faced off against each other, but the picture was a bit funny, because the difference in body shape between the two was too great. Lauren is an adult, about 1.9 meters tall and muscular. And Peter was only 11 years old at this time, and his body had not developed rapidly, and his height was only about Lauren's waist. The two stood together and had a serious duel, but the atmosphere was very funny. Lauren also said with a smile, you attack me first, it is my care for the new members, I will not be polite later. Peter looked at the proud student of Professor Flitwick in front of him, but he didn't dare to relax. Since watching these senior duel matches just now, he has already had a lot of ideas in his mind, and now he is ready to give it a try. Since Lauren wanted to let himself, Peter accepted it bluntly. He directly swarmed a flock of birds, summoned a group of birds out of thin air, and then said, 10,000 bullets. Such Lauren. Peter's 2 spells were fired in succession, and the speed was so fast that everyone couldn't react, so that Lauren, who had a relaxed expression on his face, quickly became serious and blocked it with an iron armor spell. But the number of these birds was a bit large, and they slammed into the iron armor curse barrier overwhelmingly, causing the barrier to make a bouncing sound and blocking Lauren's vision in front of him. At this moment, Peter tapped himself with his wand, and then he quickly disappeared in the eyes of everyone. Merlin, he can actually know the phantom body spell. Even a 6th grader of me can't, this is too shocking. One of the students in the audience exclaimed, full of disbelief, the phantom body spell is arrogant. The spell that Luo Bai learned, but he was only 11 years old. Did he learn it in the womb? 5. Lauren quickly solved the birds that besieged him, and found that Peter was no longer on the stage. He was stunned for a moment, then realized it in an instant, and shouted in surprise, it's the illusory charm. He didn't know the super armor and body protection spell, but he still quickly cast a few iron armor spells in a row to surround himself and beware of the opponent's sneak attack. Sure enough, when he just said, armor protection, a few disarming spells shot at him, and slammed into the newly arranged protective cover. Lauren didn't show any weakness, and directly fired a few, whole-body restraint spells, in the direction from which the disarming spell was sent. But they were all empty, and obviously the invisible Peter was no longer in his original position. Then he shot a few sleeping curses out of thin air from the other direction, and was evaded by Lauren, and then just 2 petrification spells counterattacked. The two were directly evenly matched, and they fought back and forth, which surprised the members of the audience and expressed their excitement again and again. Although Chris made psychological preparations in advance, he was still shocked by this scene. He didn't expect his junior to learn the illusory body charm. Then he saw the stunned expression of Ravenclaw's female teammate, and asked with a wry smile, "This time you should believe what I said earlier that you can't underestimate him. You see, he has the upper hand in the showdown with Lauren now. If Lauren can't break Peter's disillusionment charm, he will be successfully attacked sooner or later." The Ravenclaw girls stared blankly at the duel competition on the stage, only spit out the word, "pervert." Professor Flitwick stood on the side at this time, watching the game going back and forth in surprise. He was so excited that he didn't know what to say. Lauren's strength understood, but he didn't expect Peter to give him such a big deal surprise. As Peter's teacher, of course he knew that the previous Peter had always been a straight and rude style of play, focusing on pressing people with power. But now he has changed his style of play, focusing on the most effective method. And these changes were made after watching the duel of the senior students just now. This shows that Peter really understands his intentions, and super strong learning ability, quickly integrate these newly learned skills. Now he can still compete with the best of the 7th grade students. Flitwick, as a teacher, is of course very happy that the students can perform like this, and once again complained in his heart that Snape took a big advantage, and let Slytherin have such a gifted student. Percy Weasley was still haunted by the fact that he lost to Peter, but now watching the wonderful showdown on stage, he was very shocked. The original dissatisfaction disappeared. When a person is stronger than you may be dissatisfied and jealous, but if you are far surpassed, there is only admiration left. He no longer thinks that his 2 younger brothers and Peter of Slytherin will have a bad relationship. Peter York, who is so talented and powerful, may become a big man like Dumbledore in the future, so he wants to befriend Peter himself, and a little regret that he didn't pay attention to Peter just now. The repeated magical attacks of the two left the wooden competition table full of holes and saw shavings flying. But then when he saw the sawdust all over the ground, his eyes lit up, and he directly said, "Flying sand and moving stones." Then there was a gust of wind in the room, which directly rolled up the wood dust on the ground and rushed towards the opposite position where Peter was. Although the phantom body spell can effectively deceive vision, it still has some limitations. So soon, in the sawdust dust, Peter's transparent figure clearly appeared in sight. Lauren finally showed a smile, and immediately sent out a few words, "Accept your weapons." All petrified. At this time, he dared not underestimate the little boy on the opposite side, and wanted to defeat Peter as soon as possible. After exposing his figure, Peter was not too disappointed. He avoided Lauren's attack and directly summoned a snake with oolong, and then used quickly grow on the snake to make a wrist thicker. The black snake, enlarged into a terrifying giant snake as thick as a bucket, charged towards Lauren with its fangs open. Lauren was taken aback by this giant snake. He directly smashed the snake's tail into pieces, and the giant snake's tail was blasted with a big hole. The pained giant snake got angry and went around Lauren's body, trying to wrap it tightly. The giant snake, which was enlarged by the magnifying spell, was so powerful that it squeezed Lauren's protective cover a little out of shape. It seemed that it was about to be shattered at any time. The people under the stage were also frightened by the sudden appearance of the giant snake, and they all stayed away from the competition stage. Especially the old Wenclaw's girl, who was most afraid of snakes, hid behind Chris and complained, "What's wrong with him? He wants to become a snake. Isn't this scary?" Chris accepted it well, and exclaimed in admiration, "This is very good. Why didn't I think of this trick before? Using the combination of oolong out of the hole and the big change charm, you can make such a big snake. Use help is perfect." When Lauren finally got rid of the entanglement and used the shrinking curse to turn the giant snake back into its original shape, Peter, who had been waiting for a long time, directly attacked with 2 petrification spells. Lauren threw 2 spells in the air with ease. When he was about to fight back, he found that his feet could not move. When he looked down, he found that the wooden boards under his feet had softened strangely, as if they were stuck in the mud, unable to move. While he cast the petrification spell on Lauren, he quietly used silent magic on the wooden board under his feet. A member of the audience exclaimed. Seeing that Lauren was successfully trapped, Peter chased after the victory and threw a series of spells out, preventing him from getting out of the trap for a while. Although Lauren was stuck in the mud, he still used his superb skills to easily deal with the overwhelming spell attack. It's just that he didn't notice that there was a thin rope behind him, as if alive, quietly came behind Lauren. All the onlookers noticed Peter's intention, and immediately closed their breaths, quietly looking at the string. No one would remind Lauren, because it was a fair fight. The magic spell was constantly thrown between the two, and the sparks were shining, which was very spectacular. Suddenly, Peter stopped in place, with a smile on the corner of his mouth. With a wave of his wand in his hand, he said, "Bound all over." As soon as the voice fell, Lauren, who felt bad, just wanted to start, and the string lying behind him quickly wrapped him up, unable to move his entire body. With Peter's voice, "Accept your weapon," the wand in his hand broke free and fell into Peter's hand on the opposite side. So far, Peter has won the duel match. Clap, clap, clap. Everyone in the audience applauded excitedly. Wonderful. It's wonderful. Professor Flitwick stood on the stage, lifted the spell on Lauren, and said excitedly, "This is the best duel match I've ever held." Even with international wizards, the dueling competition is as exciting as it is. In their duel, they didn't use too many advanced spells. They only relied on superb technology to make the basic spells glow with different vitality. As I have always emphasized, magic is never the strongest, only the most suitable. Yes, Flitwick blushed with excitement and danced, and the wand in his hand kept sparking, showing his mood. Peter walked up to Lauren and gave him his clutch back. "Senior Goshawk, your wand." "Peter, can I call you that?" Lauren took over her wand and looked at the boy who was 7 years younger than herself for the first time, with sighs on her face. "You were really amazing. Successfully beat me. I was your age, but I was still complacent that I had mastered a petrification spell. I used to think I was a genius, but you taught me what real talent is." "Of course, Senior Goshik," Peter said with a smile. He could see that although Lauren Goshik was a little disappointed, there was no gloom in his eyes, and he accepted his failure calmly. "I think this is a very worthwhile appointment, Manpower. Call me Lauren," Lauren Goshawk said cheerfully. Then with a wave of his wand, a dark blue notebook flew over from where he was sitting, took the notebook, and Lauren handed it to Peter. "This is what you deserve. It has my detailed discussion on the magic attack and turning. This is what I have achieved for many years. You can use it well. If you don't understand, you can come to me and ask, or send me a letter." Looking at the notebook, Peter looked up at Lauren, the cheerful 7th grade Ravenclaw senior, with no reluctance in his eyes, as if he was just giving him an unimportant book. "Take it, Peter," Flitwick said softly, stepping forward. "Lauren is about to graduate now, and this notebook won't be of much use to him. And the Goshawks are a family that loves to share knowledge. If it is useful to you, when they need help in the future, just go and help." "Yes, take it." Lauren shoved the notebook directly into Peter's arms, and said with a smile, "I am determined to be like my grandmother in the future, to collect and organize all kinds of spells from all over the world, then compile a spell encyclopedia. You are so powerful, I believe you can even create new magic spells in the future. Just remember to add it to my spell encyclopedia." When Peter heard his ambition, he was very surprised. He didn't expect that this senior with a cheerful personality would have such a grand ambition. Immediately, he cherished the notebook, and said admiringly, "Senior Lauren, if you want to start your grand goal, please remember to inform me." This guy Lauren refused the invitation of the Ministry of Magic. He plans to learn knowledge from his grandma Miranda Gorshik in the years after graduation. When he is ready, he will set off and travel around the world to spend years collecting spell knowledge. Flitwick's introduction seemed to complain, but the smug look on his face showed that he was very supportive of his favorite protégé's decision. Seeing that the notebook was obtained by Peter, everyone looked at him enviously, and then a student in the 6th grade felt that he could do it, and said to Lauren, "You just said, as long as you can win, you can get your spellcasting skills, but have now been acquired by Peter. What if the rest of us want to challenge you?" Lauren suddenly laughed angrily. Does this 6th grade student think that he lost to Peter, so he thinks he can beat himself like Peter? He said angrily, "If you want to challenge me, you can continue. In my head, as long as you beat me, you can also get it. How do you want to come? As soon as the words fell, some of them jumped and tried, especially the 6th grade boy who asked the question just now, raised his hand and wanted to be the first to take the stage. It's up to you, Adolph Taylor, since you're so active, come up. Others can wait first. Lauren pointed the boy's name funny. Professor Flitwick stood aside and looked at it with a small ha, without any intention of interfering. Several people in the 7th grade are very aware of Lauren's strength, so they have no intention of challenging. Several people gathered together, watching the boys excitedly taking the stage as if they were having fun. One of them gloated, "This Tyler is going to be out of luck." He thought Lauren was a bully. Seeing Lauren get beat by a 1st grader. "Do you really think Lauren is weak?" Another 7th grader looked at Peter not far away and exclaimed in admiration, "The most shocking thing is Peter York. When he was brought by Professor Flitwick at first, I thought he was only invited by the professor because of his talent. Entered the club, but I didn't expect his strength to be so powerful." Although there were some factors that Lauren despised in the fight just now, he defeated Lauren in a dignified manner. "I have dueled with Lauren so many times, but I have never won. All I can do is call him a freak." Several other 7th graders agreed, arguing that they were the best among their peers themselves, but dwarfed by Peter. Just before they finished talking, the two on stage officially started the game. Obviously, Adolph Taylor, who was full of self-confidence, was crushed by Lauren directly at the beginning, and magic after another attacked him continuously, so that he could only resist the attack with iron armor. But Lauren's spell was overwhelming, making his iron armor spell on the verge of collapse. Soon, the shield of the iron armor spell was defeated by a spell, dissipating like glass shattered. Taylor, who had no shelter, was directly attacked by a spell. Hit by several petrification spells and mischief spells in a row, it is as motionless as a stone, and the front teeth grow directly to the ground, and the hair on the head turns green. Very funny. Lauren, who quickly ended the battle, lifted the spell on her opponent with a refreshing look, and then asked again, "Who else is going to challenge me?" Adolph Taylor stepped off the stage gloomily, and in the eyes of everyone watching the play, his face flushed and shrank to one side. Originally came to the stage full of confidence, but he was crushed and defeated in a short while. If it wasn't for Professor Flitwick, he would have wanted to run out and hide himself so that no one could find him. It's too embarrassing. The few people who were still eager to try, have all died down at this time, and have no idea of challenging. After all, Adolph Taylor's strength should not be underestimated, but he was still completely abused by Lauren. It proved his strength once again, and also let everyone clearly see Peter's strong strength. After all, he is the one who can defeat Lauren. No one is going to challenge Lauren anymore, and the duel match is officially over. Everyone sat back on the sofa again, but everyone was still reminiscing about the game just now, unable to calm down for a long time. Professor Flitwick stood on the wooden table and looked at everyone with a smile. "It's very late now, the party should be over. But before leaving, I'll give everyone a task, and everyone will use the spell they are best at. Practice well, and then think if you can continue to develop more uses. At the same time next week, we AC/DC will get together again to discuss research." "Okay, bye Professor Flitwick. See you next week, Professor." The students packed up and said goodbye to Flitwick. "Peter, wait," Flitwick called to Peter, who was about to go back with Chris. "I hope you'll be able to book a copy of Spell Innovations. We'll be discussing the intellectual arguments on it most of the time." Magic Innovations. Is it a professional journal similar to Deformation Today? Peter asked in surprise. So far, he only knew that the most famous newspapers and periodicals in the wizarding world were The Daily Prophet, The Quibbler, Witcher Weekly, The Broomstick Book, and the highly professional Transformation Today, but he did not listen to it. Said the Curse Journals. Innovation on Magical Charms is an international professional journal for charmsology, with a small audience, so you haven't heard of it. But there are a lot of insights from experts on charms, and newly invented spells appear from time to time, so eye-opening for you guys. Flitwick explained. As for how to book, you can ask Chris Jones next to you. They all ordered the journal early. Quote, "I will, Professor," Peter promised. Professor Flitwick is the reviewer of the Magic Journal, and many of the papers published by magic experts are reviewed by him at the first time, so we can see these works at the first time. Chris introduced proudly. Peter looked at Professor Flitwick in amazement. He was really unbelievable. To be a reviewer for an international professional journal, you must first have a high reputation and strong professionalism. Speaking of which, Hogwarts teachers are indeed superior compared to other schools of magic. In addition to being known as the most powerful Dumbledore, Professor McGonagall, Professor of Transfiguration, is the premier Transfiguration Master, and he is often referred to as Transfiguration. Revised article in the professional journal, Transformation Today. Potions Professor Snape is a master of potions and a member of the International Potions Society. Herbology Professor Sprout cultivates herbs of good quality, and she cultivates almost all the herbs in the school. In addition to her role in the school, Mrs. Hooch, the flight teacher, is also a professional advisor to the English Quidditch team. There is also Professor Flitwick, who was not only the champion of the duel competition when he was young, but now he is a reviewer of the Charms Journal, and he is also a master of charms, second only to Dumbledore. Therefore, Hogwarts is full of talents. Even Hagrid, who makes up the number, has a set of methods to take care of magical animals. Saying goodbye to Professor Flitwick, Peter and Chris walked down the Ravenclaw spiral staircase to head back to the Slytherin dormitory. The two were talking and laughing, and they were walking when they almost bumped into Professor Green, who suddenly appeared around the corner. Professor Green. Peter stopped and looked in surprise at a suitcase that Professor Green was carrying, and the suitcase kept vibrating, and there were living things shaking inside. Professor Green, what are you doing in this box? Peter asked in surprise. Professor Green didn't expect to meet the students so late. His eyes were a little erratic, and then he explained calmly, "This is a boggart I caught. It's going to be used for teaching the third-grade students next week." Then he asked back, "Why are you here? It's very late now." Peter looked at Professor Green suspiciously. He smelled a tinge of blood. "Will it hurt to catch boggart?" But he didn't think much and replied, "We went to Professor Flitwick's spell club, and we're back now." Quote, quote. Green looked at Peter in surprise and asked, "Are you a first-year student? Are you invited by Professor Flitwick to the spell club?" Peter was not very active in defense against the dark arts class, so he not too impressed with Peter. Peter is very talented in spells, so he was attracted by Professor Flitwick. Chris replied for Peter, then glanced at Professor Green's box and said, "Professor, your boggart seems to be too active and needs my help." "No, no." Green moved the suitcase slightly behind him, blocked it with his robe, and said solemnly, "It's almost time for curfew. You should hurry back. If I see you still outside, I will detain you." "You score," then hurried away with the box. "There's a ghost," Peter said, squinting as he looked at Professor Green's disappearing figure. Hogwarts' defense against the dark arts, because of the curse, has to change a professor every year. And the people who will come to apply now are either idiots who don't know how to live or die, or people with bad intentions. But obviously Professor Green not an idiot, Chris said faintly, looking at the figure that had disappeared in the distance. Immediately, the conversation changed, "But this has nothing to do with us. We will be fine if we don't participate at will." Peter nodded. No matter what this Professor Green was doing, as long as it didn't affect him, he didn't bother to care. After all, the curse of this position is very powerful, and there are almost no good endings. The study time passed quickly. Peter spends the rest of the day in the library reading books and accumulating points except for class time. In the blink of an eye, it's Halloween. All the students were discussing the Halloween party tonight. After the last herbal medicine class of the afternoon, the students came out of the greenhouse to watch and excitedly discuss the Halloween costumes. Peter, Cedric, who was taking the herbal medicine class together, chased after him and said excitedly, "I just heard from our dean that Principal Dumbledore invited the skeleton band to perform." "Skull Band, are they famous?" Peter asked curiously, not paying attention to these. "Definitely famous. They're second only to the Wacky Sisters, and my mom loves their style. She says the Wacky Sisters' rock songs give her a headache, but the skulls are soothing," Cedric said excitedly. "Then I'm really looking forward to it. I've never heard Wizards music before." Peter was also full of curiosity. After he came to Hogwarts, his focus was on magic, and he didn't know much about Wizards life. Peter has never had a Wizards Halloween, so he is looking forward to it. Especially the ghosts in the castle are very happy, thinking that today is their holiday, so they all dressed up grandly. "Good afternoon, Mr. Barrow." Are you going to the astronomy tower today? Peter asked politely when he met the Bloody Barrow. The Bloody Barrow is the ghost of Slytherin. He is usually silent and his eyes are dull. He is described as withered. His robes are covered with silver blood, and he does not know whether it is his own or someone else's. Still wearing a pair of shackles on his hands, he always likes to be alone on the astronomical tower, looking at the Ravenclaw tower and muttering to himself. The appearance of the Bloody Barrow is very scary, so even Slytherin students are very afraid of him. Usually, as long as the Bloody Barrow sits, a seat will be automatically vacated. But Peter knew a little about him. He knew that Barrow the Blood was Slytherin's first trainee, learning magic skills from Salazar Slytherin. During school, she fell in love with Helena Ravenclaw, Ms. Grey, but she didn't love Barrow. Later Helena Ravenclaw stole the crown and fled to the Albanian forest. Barrow is sent by Rowena Ravenclaw to find Helena, but Helena refuses to go back to school with Barrow and is killed by an angry Barrow. Then Barrow, who realized that he had killed the one he loved the most, stabbed himself with the knife that killed Helena. After their death, both returned to Hogwarts, and Helena became Lady Grey. Barrow was also known as Barrow the Blood because of his blood. Ms. Grey has always refused to meet Barrow because she hated Barrow for killing herself. And Barrow also put a pair of shackles on himself because of remorse, expressing repentance. Peter York, the Bloody Barrow, focused his eyes, looked at the only Slytherin student in the first grade who was not afraid of himself, then shook his head and said hoarsely, "All ghosts will gather together on Halloween. Gryffindor's ghost Nick is going to be in the basement classroom. For a banquet, I need to go there." Peter looked at the ghost whose eyes were dull and full of pain, and couldn't help asking, "Mr. Barrow, the book says that ghosts are the marks left by wizards who are afraid of death and are unwilling to continue going down. What about you, are you afraid of death?" Afraid of death. Sigh. Barrow smiled contemptuously, and then said painfully, "I chose death myself. But death does not accept my sinful soul. I live in eternal remorse, unable to ascend the train of death." So, the ghost didn't appear because of fear of death, but because of the death of the obsessive wizard. Peter muttered to himself after thinking, "My teacher will be very happy if he sees you." Barrow the Blood man looked at the handsome boy in front of him and couldn't help but say, "You are talented and eager to learn. I have heard many professors and ghosts talk about you." "Huh, are you talking about Salazar Slytherin?" Peter asked in surprise. "Isn't it that Mr. Slytherin hates hemp wizards? At the beginning, he quarreled with the other three founders for the reason of blood, and finally left Hogwarts. Then how did you get into Slytherin?" Barrow asked rhetorically. "Because of ambition." Peter got stuck, unable to answer. "Time is a wonderful and cruel thing, it changes many things," Barrow said hoarsely. "At that time, the wizards had a hard time. Muggles were chasing wizards frantically, many little wizards all suffered. The four giants saw this and decided to build a school to teach and protect the little wizards. But in choosing students, Slytherin and the other three had differences. At that time, Muggle beliefs were so terrifying that some Muggle wizards even believed that their magic power was possessed by the devil. Extremely concerned about their identity as a wizard reject. Until one time, Muggle troops stormed into the castle because of the betrayal of a young wizard. After this incident, Slytherin was extremely distrustful of Muggle wizards, because he thought these people were very unreliable and would betray them at any time. And Hogwarts at the time couldn't take such a risk. But the other three founders thought they couldn't kill everyone with one shot, and if they didn't take them in, these little wizards from the Muggle world would have nowhere to go, and they would even be burned to death by crazy Muggles. Because of the disagreement, the four founders decided to use their surnames as the names of the colleges and divide the students into different colleges. "So, Mr. Barrow, you mean that Slytherin cares about the status of the hemp student, not the bloodline?" Peter was a little surprised. Barrow didn't speak, and floated there quietly, staring blankly at the tower in the distance, muttering, "Helena." Seeing Barrow immersed in his own world again, Peter was a little helpless. Peter guessed that the Bloody Barrow didn't want to deal with the reason for his death. "I'm afraid it was Helena Ravenclaw." The obsession with guilt and admiration made him linger in the castle for nearly 1,000 years, begging for Helena's forgiveness. But obviously, Helena could not forgive the man who killed her. So there is never a day of relief. Chapter 91. After chatting with the Bloody Barrow, Peter walked to the auditorium. As soon as I entered the gate, I saw that all the candles floating in the air were gone, but replaced by jack-o'-lanterns. There are also many transformed bats flying and squeaking non-stop. There was a lot of food on the table, but it was all horrible. Bloody cakes, sausages and ketchup create a bloody intestine effect. And the soup is full of realistic eyeballs that are still moving. These terrifying foods almost spit out Peter's stomach acid, and now he has completely lost his taste. Alan, who was enjoying the meal, looked at Peter in surprise and asked, "Why don't you eat it? The taste is pretty good, especially the eyeballs in the soup, which are made of tapioca flour and sticky when chewed." Peter listened to Alan's description. His face was blue, and he asked with difficulty, "Don't you think these foods look horrible and disgusting?" "No, 020, as all conjured up with magic, it's not disgusting." Alan looked at his roommate with a puzzled expression. Well, Peter gave up arguing with him completely. No wonder wizards in Muggle movies and novels are so scary. Anyone who sees the bloody and gloomy appearance in the Great Hall will probably have nightmares. It is precisely because they admire the rough nerves of the wizards. Peter looked around and found that the students from the wizarding world and the Muggle world could tell the difference at a glance. Those students who were eating bloody sausages and real eyeball soup were probably all from the wizarding world. Students with the same expression as Peter, and even vomited, are definitely from the Muggle world. I can't blame Peter for not being able to eat it, it's because of the magic effect. These things are so realistic. The visual impact is too strong. Enduring the horrific scene, Peter breathed a sigh of relief until all the food was gone. Tonight he has to go to the back kitchen and ask the house elves for some food. The original seats of teachers in the auditorium have been removed and turned into a stage shape, and the long tables of the 4 colleges have also been moved to both sides, leaving a middle position. Dumbledore walked onto the stage with a smile on his face, and then announced to the crowd, "Tonight we are honored to invite the Skull Band, and they will be celebrating Halloween with everyone. Let's welcome them with warm applause." Upon hearing the name of the band, all the wizarding students burst into cheers. Only the Muggle students waited curiously for the band to appear, wanting to see what kind of band made these people so crazy. Peter sat on the long table, craned his neck in anticipation, then stared at the band members who appeared on stage. Well, they shouldn't be called people, because they are veritable skeletons. These skeletons had musical instruments hanging on their bodies, walked very flexibly to the middle of the stage, and posed their poses. With the wizard using his wand to change the lights of different colors, these skeletons played the musical instruments, and then there was an opening dance. The white skeleton members lined up in a row, and knocked the board of the stage neatly with the bones of the feet, which sounded like tap dancing. Accompanied by the dynamic music, the students in the audience cheered excitedly around the stage and danced with the skeletons. Peter's eyes widened, looking at the dancing skeletons to see if they were controlled by a wizard behind their backs with magic. After all, these skeletons are bare bones, and they don't look like they can move on their own. Alan stood beside Peter, roaring and jumping excitedly, his face full of excitement. After the hot dance, a skeleton wearing sunglasses stepped forward, carrying a guitar, posing coolly, playing music, and cheering from the audience, "Climb in, climb in." Then the skull in sunglasses, holding a microphone, sang directly along with the music. "The owl flies with the white clouds." Letters in green ink from a mysterious distance. "Lively alley hidden by brickwork. Fill all your dreams." Dawn wakes the castle windows. Floating flickering candles light up the auditorium. Riding and whistling on the field. Peter listened to the song and thought it was pretty good, like a country tune, and it sounded like it was describing Hogwarts. And to Peter's surprise, the vocals of the lead singer's sunglasses skeleton are very magnetic and emotional. The only thing that makes Peter a little weird is that this is sung by a skeleton. And there is a group of skeletons accompaniment and dance. Combined with the atmosphere of Halloween, it feels like coming to the ghost world. Afterwards, the skeleton band continued to perform a dance. The accompanying skeletons directly removed their ribs, used them as wooden sticks, and beat them on the drums. The rhythm was cheerful and weird. At the climax of the band's performance, the skeletons invited some students and professors to dance together. Peter sat down and looked at the stage with wide eyes. Dumbledore happily pulled a Miss Skeleton and danced a cheerful dance. Professor Flitwick was held on his shoulders by a strong skeleton, dancing dynamic dance and laughing. With his red face, I don't know if he was drunk or excited. There is also a senior Gryffindor girl who was invited. After dancing a waltz with the lead singer, she took off the lead singer's skull and kissed it hard. 2 red lips were printed on by Senson's skull. Print. Peter looked at the crazy students around him, and could only sit in his own position, watching the strange scene very uncomfortable. He looked around and found that there was a girl on his side who was also alone. Sitting there was Angelina Johnson of Gryffindor. It happened that she also looked here, and the two looked at each other with mutual sympathy. As students of the Muggle world, they are still somewhat uncomfortable with the wizarding world. Peter, why are you still sitting here? Come and dance with us. The twins ran over, pulling him excitedly into the crowd. Being carried by the two, Peter struggled a few times before giving up. Then he asked them amusingly, "Why are you willing to talk to me now? Didn't you all cut off your friendship with me because of the Quidditch match earlier?" These two guys have been avoiding Peter since Charlie Weasley was knocked unconscious in the infirmary with a stick by a Slytherin team member and lost the game. It made Peter think that they were taking their anger on him and were not ready to communicate with him. As a result, they came to him now. "How could I ignore you? Who said that?" George said with an expression that never happened. "We're just a little busy at this time, and you've been in the library all the time, and we don't like going there. That's why we can't meet each other. How can there be a breakup?" Fred rolled his eyes and said confidently, "Actually, after the Quidditch match, there was a strong smell of gunpowder between Gryffindor and Slytherin. If we commit crimes against the wind and play together, people in both academies will think we are traitors. That would be miserable. So we can only pretend that our relationship with you has faded. This is for ***7. Yes, that's the reason." George insisted that was the reason. Peter smiled and shook his head, but he didn't care too much. He is a mature person of psychological age, and naturally he doesn't care about the words of 2 11-year-old children. And even if they really broke up with him, he wouldn't be too sad. "Okay, don't think about anything else. Dumbledore finally invited the skeleton band today, we can't just waste our time here," Fred said cheerfully while twisting his hips. "Compared to the Weird Sisters that Mom likes band, I think Skull is cooler." After being pulled by the twins to dance a burlesque dance, Peter finally couldn't be ashamed to continue dancing, and hurriedly took the opportunity to escape from here and left the auditorium. Walk along the stairs towards Hufflepuff's dormitory. He is going to the back kitchen to find something to eat. "I didn't eat dinner, and I was dragged by the twins to dance for a while, and now I am a little hungry." It's just that he found a sneaky figure in front of him, carrying a leather suitcase and walking outside. Peter took a closer look and found that it was Professor Green. Peter hurriedly cast a disillusionment spell on himself, stuck it to the corner, and followed. Green was teaching, looking a little wary, watching the surrounding movement from time to time. The suitcase in his hand was constantly vibrating, and there was a roar coming from inside. "Be quiet." Professor Green was different from the old-fashioned look in the past. At this time, his expression was a bit violent, and he slapped the box viciously to calm the contents inside. Peter was a little speechless at this time. Shouldn't the Halloween curse be triggered when Harry Potter comes? Why does it appear now? Especially looking at Green's appearance at this time, makes it hard not to believe that he is doing bad things. Although Peter didn't want to follow Professor Green, after all, Green was an old Auror with strong anti-reconnaissance ability. If he was not careful, he would be discovered by him, and Peter would not have the confidence to defeat him at that time. But the system suddenly jumped out and gave a task. "Ding, the host has found the sneaky defense against the dark arts professor. Please ask the host to find out Professor Green's intentions, and the task will be rewarded with 20 points. 10 points for reporting to other professors. 30 points for catching him." System tasks are not necessary tasks. As a prudent Peter, he generally does not take risks, but the reward of system points is too tempting. He has only accumulated 15 points by reading and studying in this period of time, but this time the task has a total of 60 points. How many books does he have to read to get these points? The reward of the final points encouraged him. He followed Professor Green from a distance with the disillusionment charm. First, he found out what this Professor Green was doing. What was in his suitcase? After following Professor Green out of the castle and walking down the path, Peter realized that this was going to the Forbidden Forest. Perhaps considering the reason of Hagrid, Green bypassed Hagrid's wooden house far away, and then did not enter the forbidden forest. Inside, Peter thought about it for a while, turned into a phoenix, and then used the bird and snake skills to directly control and shrink his body. In the blink of an eye, Peter turned into a red bird the size of a thumb. Chased Green. Green's footsteps were not fast, and Peter quickly caught up. At this time, his body was very small, flying among the trees, and it was difficult to be found. After tracking for a while, Peter in midair found Green stopped in front of a giant tree, and then saw him tap his wand rhythmically on the tree trunk a few times, and then he disappeared in place in a blink of an eye. Peter, who was hiding in the tree, looked at the scene just now in surprise. Obviously, this giant tree is an entrance. He flew down directly, then changed back to human form, carefully summoned a small snake, and controlled it to touch the position of the tree trunk. But after waiting for a while, the little snake was still lying there. Nothing happened. This time Peter came up himself, and he looked at the giant tree, which was no different from the other trees around. It's just that the tree is relatively old and almost needs two people to hug it. He stretched out his wand and tapped according to Green's rhythm just now, and then he felt the magic fluctuations from the tree trunk. He quickly used the bird and snake skill to shrink himself to the size of his little finger, and then touched the tree trunk. This time the tree trunk seemed to not exist, and Peter fell directly into it. Then, accompanied by a dizzy teleportation magic, he disappeared in place. During the teleportation, Peter tried his best to maintain his shrunken state to avoid being discovered when he arrived. In the blink of an eye, Peter felt down to earth again, and when he regained his senses, he realized that he was no longer in the forbidden forest but appeared in a large room. There was a mess around the room, there were piles of iron cages, and there were traces of blood on the ground. In the middle of the house, there was the leather suitcase that Green was carrying. At this time, the suitcase was opened with its front facing upwards, and there was a screeching sound from the entrance of the pitch-black suitcase. Peter directly transformed into a phoenix the size of an index finger and flew over the box. I can see that there is still room in the box, apparently cast a traceless stretch charm. It looks like Newt Scamander's leather box. After a while, he heard the animals roaring in pain and Green's cursing, which made Peter very curious about what was going on inside. He flew straight down into the box, and in the blink of an eye, the box was like another world. The space here was huge, as big as a football field. Peter followed the sound and flew over Green, and saw Green was torturing an adult unicorn. The unicorn was firmly trapped by the chain and could not move, but Green made a whip from the wand in his hand and slapped the unicorn fiercely, causing the unicorn to whine in pain. In the big iron cage beside the unicorn, a pure golden juvenile unicorn anxiously called out to the adult unicorn. "You beast, you actually hurt me. If it weren't for the unicorn being valuable, I would have killed you early." Green cursed while beating, his face was full of viciousness. Peter looked at the scene in front of him, a little unbelievable. As a retired Auror, Green was not related to animal dealers. But the magical animals he saw here were not only unicorns, but also horned camels, lunar beasts, wicked birds, and eight-eyed giant spiders. And these animals are locked in iron cages. They are thin and hungry. And according to what he just said, these animals are all going to be sold. The fact that a generation of Aurors is still a fantastic beasts dealer is hilarious. Peter instantly remembered how many times he had seen Green carrying a suitcase in and out of Hogwarts. Immediately understood that this guy was probably imitating Newt Scamander, used the traceless stretching charm to create a space in his suitcase, then quietly went to the forbidden forest, captured magical animals, put them in the suitcase, and take it back to his office. It's just that Newt Scamander opened up the box space to protect the magical animals, and this Green is to sell the magical animals. These fairies, don't they owe them 6,000 gold galleons? They are so eager to reincarnate. Green muttered to himself as he beat the unicorn, "When I sell this batch of goods, I can earn 30,000 gold galleons. When the time comes, I will ask you to beg me." Seeing this situation, Peter turned around and flew away. The system has rewarded him with 20 points, indicating that he has completed the first task of the system. Flying out of the suitcase, Peter fell back to human form. He directly closed the box on the ground and locked the lock to prevent Green from coming out. Then directly turned into a phoenix, grabbed the suitcase, turned into flames and disappeared in place. In the Forbidden Forest, there was a flash of fire, and Peter appeared with a suitcase. He originally wanted to hand over the suitcase and Professor Green inside to Dumbledore as soon as possible, so that the task given by the system would be completed. There was no need for him to risk confronting Green. But obviously he still underestimated the strength of Green, who was born as an Auror. He was just about to take the box back to school, but the box in his hand shook violently, accompanied by Green's roaring and cursing. After a while, there was a violent explosion and the panicked roar of animals. Then the suitcase in Peter's hand was pierced with a big hole by a spell. The suitcase broke free from Peter's hand, fell to the ground, and opened automatically. The space inside the suitcase was destroyed by the spell, and then it was like nausea. He immediately spit out everything inside. The one who was spit out together was Green. He stumbled to the ground, and then stood up with a quick roll. He vigilantly looked around with his wand, and roared, "Who is it? Come out." Peter maintained the form of a little phoenix at this time, and quietly hid in the tree and looked at Green below with a look of annoyance. Experience kills. Peter only remembers that Newt Scamander couldn't get out after being locked in a crate during the Battle of New York, but he forgot that if the space where the untraceable stretch charm was cast was destroyed, everything inside would be destroyed. Was spit out. If you have the ability to follow me, don't you have the ability to fight me alone? Coward, coward, come out. Green looked around and found no figure, but he must have been hiding nearby, somewhere. But after some verbal provocation, no one came out, so he directly attacked the surrounding frantically, trying to force the hidden person out. Green was hit with dust by his spell, and the tree trunks burst. Under the intensive spell, the surrounding ground seemed to be plowed again, and the leaves and trunks were all pierced by the spell. Peter looked at the scene in front of him and couldn't help but be surprised. As expected of an old Auror, although this spell attack looks like a mess, shooting all over the sky, but if you take a closer look, you will find that he hardly missed an inch of the surrounding space. If someone is hiding nearby, they must have been forced out. But Green obviously didn't know the special force, and he didn't find a little red bird the size of an index finger hidden in the tree. After attacking for a while, no one came out. Green was also puzzled. Could it be that the stalker had already left? Thinking that the stalker was probably someone from the school, and when he thought that Dumbledore would be led over, Green was ready to leave the place immediately. He just turned his head and looked around, and the magical animals in the iron cage were spit out and piled up into hills. A struggle flashed across Green's face. He didn't want to give up these hard-to-catch prey. But now that the suitcase has been destroyed by him, it will take a while to repair and cast the traceless stretching charm again. He was worried that the person following him during this time would report his track to others. This is 30,000 galleons. Green's eyes flashed with heat, and then he fell into a painful choice. In the end, his calm thinking as an Auror worked, and Green gritted his teeth and decided to abandon the shipment. If the goods are gone, we can try to find a way next time, but if he is found, he will have to stay in Azkaban for the rest of his life. Peter was also secretly anxious when hiding in the tree, seeing Green going away. If he didn't catch him this time, he wouldn't have such a chance next time. Even if he followed up with the professors to report Green's sale of Forbidden Forest animals, I'm afraid there is no way to get Green's attention other than to scare the snakes. Because Grimm is an old Auror with a lot of connections in the Ministry of Magic, the experts wouldn't believe a child's word and doubt a positive Auror. And he is more anxious about his points. If he misses this opportunity, it will be difficult to have such a big reward opportunity in the future. That's giving up a full 40 points. After thinking about it for a while, Peter's eyes were firm. He directly changed back to human form, stretched out his wand from among the dense leaves, aimed at Green under the tree, and a silent stun spell quickly shot at him. The speed of the spell was very fast. Seeing that it was about to hit Green's back, it was suddenly blocked by an invisible shield. Green, who was eliminating the evidence, suddenly turned his head, with a strange smile on his face. Grab is you. Break apart. Green cast a spell directly at the tree behind him, and the giant tree blew up into pieces. Peter, who was hiding in the tree, only had time to cast an iron armor spell to protect himself, and then he exposed his tracks. As the sawdust dissipated, Peter's figure appeared in Green's eyes. Green was surprised at first, then he showed a dangerous smile, and said, "Ah, look who it is. It's the little wizard of Slytherin. Your name is Peter York, right?" What are you doing here without going to the dance? You must know that the Forbidden Forest is a very dangerous place. Think about it, a first-year freshman wants to go to the Forbidden Forest to explore beyond his control, and then there are no bones left. Such a sad ending. Looking at the killing intent in Green's eyes, Peter pretended to be innocent and asked angrily, Professor Green, you are a professor at the school, or an honorary Auror. Why do you do this kind of business of selling magical creatures? Green looked at the innocent little boy in front of him, his guard relaxed a little, looked at Peter as if he were watching an animal in a cage, and then sneered, Aurors. Humph, only you little children really think that amazing, how much I worked so hard for the Ministry of Magic. After retirement, the Ministry of Magic is like sending beggars. Send me with 1,000 gold galleons. And those greedy goblins set me up, well, I not only lost the 1,000 galleons. They also made me owe 10,000 galleons. They also threatened me if I didn't repay the money as soon as possible. If I do, I will shake out all the things I did before, and ruin my reputation. Green said with a look of fear and hatred, I scraped everything together and sold all the treasures to barely collect 4,000 galleons. But those goblins are still not satisfied. They like to torture people like dementors. Squeeze me again and again. Finally, I remembered an animal trafficker I caught before. He had a cross-border trading line in his hands. I used to want to continue to follow this line and find everyone. So I didn't follow the ministry. Report in advance. Green said with a smile, but his eyes showed a chill, but before it's finished, the Ministry of Magic forced me to retire. I owe the goblin money again, and I can only change hands and cooperate with the former animal dealer. It's ridiculous. I was wondering where to look for magical creatures, and I saw the recruitment of a defense against the dark arts professor at Hogwarts, which was a godsend. Because the Forbidden Forest is home to the largest colony of unicorns in Scotland, and lots of fantastic beasts. It's a cornucopia. A unicorn can be sold for 2,000 gold galleons, and the little unicorn is even more expensive. Those wealthy pure-blooded wizard ladies abroad like this kind of unicorn the most. There is also the 8-eyed giant spider, a pint of venom is as high as 100 galleons. And there are at least tens of thousands of 8-eyed giant spiders in the Forbidden Forest. This is a steady stream of golden galleons. Why are you telling me so much? Peter asked, frowning. Why? Green laughed and said with a frantic expression, I'm driven crazy by these things, but I have nowhere to tell. Now that I meet a little wizard like you, I just spit it out. Of course, I won't let it go. Everyone else who knows these secrets will only remember that I've always been that old-fashioned old Auror. When this transaction is completed, I will have tens of thousands of galleons. Enough to live the rest of my life comfortably. I will not allow anyone to spoil my plan. You're going to kill me. Peter looked terrified, then pleaded, please, I don't want to die. I won't tell anyone else what happened tonight. Or you can cast me a spell to forget about tonight. I remember there is a magic called the Forgetfulness Mantra. Oh, you also know the Oblivion Curse. No wonder he is a little wizard who is called a genius by other professors. Green said in surprise, then looked pity on his face. But I can't leave any hidden dangers. Dumbledore is very powerful, maybe even can make you remember. So sorry, boy, you have to die. Don't worry, I will hold a moment of silence for you at your funeral. With that said, Green pointed out his wand directly at Peter, and the tip of the wand emitted a creepy green light. Professor, you're talking too much. Peter's face suddenly disappeared, and he said sarcastically. Field, Peter shouted. In an instant, Phoenix Field appeared out of thin air, grabbed the wand in Green's hand with one claw, grabbed it without him noticing, and flew away. Field grabbed the wand and flew over Peter's head, throwing Green's wand at him. Taking this dark wand, Peter smiled and looked at Green in the distance. Professor Green, it seems that you still can't kill me. AC/DC. Green was a little stunned, and then looked at the phoenix in the air, with a look of annoyance, and then full of envy and greed. How could I forget that you still have a phoenix? If I have a phoenix, I will not worry about food and clothing in this life. Not the slightest look of panic when the wand is taken away. Peter looked at Green vigilantly, so fearless, I'm afraid there is another move. As expected, Green flicked his wrist, and a wand was ejected from his wrist into his hand. Spare wand. Didn't expect you to be so careful. Peter was full of surprise, worthy of a seasoned old Auror. Holding the wand in his hand, Green looked at Peter coldly, and said, "Should I say that I am worthy of being a student of Slytherin? I actually deceived me. If I hadn't always been cautious, I would have fallen into your hands today. Your phoenix may be powerful, but you're still going to die with me." Green didn't say any more nonsense this time, and fired a fierce spell directly. Peter's iron armor spell was broken by a single blow, but fortunately he moved to the side to dodge the attack. When Phoenix Field saw Peter being attacked, he leaned over and rushed towards Green, making a sharp screeching sound, constantly attacking Green with his claws, and his body also lit up with flames, trying to burn him to death. But Green was an experienced old Auror after all, and he kept attacking the Phoenix with a spell to keep it from getting close to him. Then, from time to time, he shoots devastating spells at Peter. Green's strength was strong, but with the Phoenix interfering, Peter breathed a sigh of relief, the pressure on his body dropped, and began to attack Green with the Phoenix. The Phoenix attack made Green unable to take care of Peter, which made him very angry. "Beast, give me death." Avada sudden. Green directly hit the Phoenix with a suicidal spell. The Phoenix made a mournful sound, and then it spontaneously ignited, turning into a mass of ashes. "Felder," Peter shouted worriedly. Although he knew that the life-sucking charm would not kill Phoenix, he couldn't help but worry. Juju. Field suddenly appeared from the ashes, who was reborn. At this time, it was only the size of a chicken, and the feathers on his body had not yet grown. Peter looked at the appearance of Field at this time, and angrily threw a series of spells at Green, after repelling him, then took the opportunity to pick up the little Field and put it in the pocket of his shirt. Green looked at the Phoenix on Peter's body in surprise and greed, and said, "Or give me your Phoenix and I'll let you go. How about it?" "Dream," Peter roared angrily. Although Phoenix won't really die, the pain in Nirvana is still no less than death. Field has already experienced Nirvana twice for him. "Then you can die," Green Ning said with a smile. Avada Kedavra. There is no way to resist the life-threatening curse, so Peter can only keep dodging, relying on the trees in the jungle to dodge everywhere. The life-suppressing spell is indeed one of the top black magics listed as one of the unforgivable spells. Every time a tree is hit, it seems to be drained of vitality and wither quickly. The dense trees in the Forbidden Forest gave Peter a chance to avoid the death-slaying charm. He hid behind the tree and directly cast a disillusionment charm on himself, then quietly walked around behind Green and waited quietly for the opportunity. "Don't hide from York. Come out." Green followed unhurriedly, like a cat and mouse, playing with his prey playfully. "This is the depths of the Forbidden Forest, no one will come here, you can't escape, it's gone. Come out and die. It's better than dying in pain later than when I catch it." Peter looked at Green, who seemed to be relaxed, but his whole body was tense. He held his breath carefully, for fear that he would find out. At this moment, the surroundings were silent, and Peter was hidden within 5 meters behind Green, daring not to dare make a little movement, or the tip of Grimm's wand will be able to issue a death-killing spell at any time. Peter has never experienced such a dangerous situation before. Although Green's strength is not comparable to that of the four principals, he is also a relatively strong member of the adult wizards. Especially a dark wizard who dares to use the life-suppressing spell. There is no chance of winning against him head-on. But fortunately, he still has the Phoenix skill, which guarantees that he will not die. Moreover, he also has the skill of the size of the bird and snake, which makes it easy for him to escape. It's just that Peter doesn't want to leave in such an embarrassed way. Whether it's to avenge Field or to reward points, he has to catch this person. Seeing that there was no movement around him, Green looked impatient. One by one, the spells were torn apart, and they shot wildly around as if they didn't want money. Seeing that Peter, who was shrinking behind Green, was only 3 meters away, he was sweating. This crazy wizard. Peter looked at Green, who was getting closer and closer, and there was a silent flock of birds. A large group of birds appeared out of nowhere, flying around Green, blocking his sight. Peter quickly shrank his body and approached Green, and instantly turned into a giant more than 10 meters tall. He flew directly to Green. Then a cutting spell was precisely aimed at Green's right hand in midair. Click. Green, who was weightless in midair, only felt his right hand get cold, and his right hand accompanies him, and the wand in his hand immediately fell to the ground. Ah! Green screamed in pain as he held the wrist of his severed right hand. But then he looked in horror at Peter, who had turned into a giant, and kicked him directly. Green, who couldn't dodge, was kicked and slammed into a giant tree. Then he fell like a rag bag, lying on the ground and spitting up blood. Peter was still not at ease, so he added a stun spell, then a petrification spell, and finally made a rope to tie it up. Finally, after a careful search, he made sure that there were no more wands and magic items hidden on his body, was relieved. Looking at Green, who looked like he was dead, Peter shrank back to his original height and kicked him hard. The old guy was so cautious, maintaining the shield all the time, blocking all of Peter's attacks. In the end, Peter risked stealth to approach, and waited for himself to enter the range of the protective shield before launching a surprise attack. Tweet. Field popped his head out of Peter's pocket. Field, I've avenged you. Are you happy? Peter asked softly, holding up Field, who looked like a chicken. If there is one person in this world that can make Peter completely reassured and trusted, it is Phoenix Field. Animals are pure-hearted, and once they are loyal, they will never betray. Field has now saved himself twice. Seeing the chaos around him, Peter was secretly surprised. He still underestimated the strength of the wizards. Such an horror has emptied all the trees within a radius of tens of meters, and the ground is full of deep pits created by the curse. Looking at the animals in the iron cage, one horned camel was hit by the magic spell launched by Green, and it was already dead. The other animals were also in shock, and they shrank in the iron cage and did not dare to move. Only the unicorn bound by the iron chain, with the scars from the whip on its white body, still held its head high and neighed unyieldingly, and its eyes were always watching the little golden unicorn in the iron cage. Peter looked at the chain on the unicorn and wanted to untie it for her, but the unicorn was very resistant to his approach and looked at him vigilantly. I won't hurt you, I just want to remove this chain for you. You see, I have defeated him just now, I'm not a bad guy. Peter spread his hands to signal that he was not in danger, expressed kindness to her, and then slowly approached. Hearing Peter's words, the unicorn's resistance was slightly reduced, and the unicorn was very intelligent and could understand human words. Only after being captured and abused by Green, she no longer trusts the same humans as Green. Peter's wand tapped the chain on the unicorn's body, and the chain snapped. Then he just stepped back and stopped disturbing the vigilant unicorn. Then, looking at the animals in the surrounding iron cages, he considered how to bring them out of the forbidden forest as evidence of Green's crime. Suddenly, the sound of horses' hooves sounded, and Peter instantly took out his wand and pointed to the sound. Who? Come out. We have no malice, little wizard, please put down our hostility. A deep voice came from the depths of the forest, and then came out two centaurs with silver-white hair and reddish-brown fur. Peter remembered the reddish-brown centaurs. The last time I saw him, it seemed to be called Bane. The two centaurs looked in shock at the destroyed woods, the animals in the iron cage, and Peter standing alone. Bane stepped forward and asked, You are Peter York, right? Don't know what's going on here. Can you tell us? Pointing his wand to Green, who was trapped not far away, Peter explained, the wizard was an animal dealer, and after applying for a professorship at the school, he took this opportunity to hunt in the forbidden forest, trying to smuggle animals. Go out and sell it. Then I bumped into it by accident, so that's how it is now. When the two centaurs heard Peter's words, their faces were full of disbelief, and Bane even blurted out, You mean you defeated the wizard and tied him up? Peter looked at their unbelieving expressions, although he didn't want to explain too much, but considering that he had to get help from centaurs, he said, Don't you know how to communicate with unicorns? It just so happened that this dark wizard caught a pair of unicorns. Beast mother and son, you can go and ask her, he said, pointing to the pair of unicorns where the iron cages were piled up. Diana, how did you get caught? Bane called out her name in surprise when he saw the unicorn. When the unicorn saw the centaur, his eyes showed joy, and he approached the centaur intimately and neighed. After communicating for a while, the two centaurs looked angry and surprised for a while, and then looked at Peter, who was leisurely beside him, in disbelief. Mr. York, Diana has already told us. Thank you for saving them. We haven't seen them for a few days. We are very worried, but we didn't expect to be caught by the dark wizard. Bane said gratefully. Speaking of which, we haven't personally expressed our gratitude to you. thank you for sending the phoenix to rescue us last time, or we might all be buried in the mouth of the eight-eyed giant spider. You're welcome, last time was a coincidence, and it was mainly due to my phoenix, I didn't do anything. Peter put the credit on Field, and he didn't want people to know that he was the phoenix. Speaking of the phoenix, I don't know if Mr. York can summon your companions. We just picked some berries. These berries are the favorite food of birds. We want to give him a taste to express our gratitude. N took out some red fruits from the animal skin bag behind him. Thank you for your kindness, but Felder was hit by the dark sorcerer's life-sucking curse just now in order to save me. He has already passed away, and he is still too young to eat. Peter took out the phoenix in his pocket, his face full of helplessness. Say it. Life Sue, my Karen, how crazy is this person to use such black magic on a child? The two centaurs exclaimed, and then saw the phoenix in Peter's hand, and said distressed-edly, Nirvana is the most painful time for Phoenix, I didn't expect this child to suffer a passive nirvana at such a young age. Peter felt a little guilty and dared not tell them that this was Field's second nirvana. The centaurs looked at the animals in the cage and said sympathetically, let's get these poor fellows out first, they have endured too much. Peter shook his head and said, I don't recommend doing this now, these animals are evidence of the Dark Wizard's crime. If we let the evidence go, magic won't admit the man's guilt. Because this Dark Wizard is not only a professor at Hogwarts, but also an Auror who retired from 020 Hugh. For the prestige of the Ministry of Magic, if there is no iron proof, no one will want to believe me. Let this person still at large. Then he said to the centaurs, you can talk to the unicorns, can you please tell the unicorns about the situation, and tell them not to leave, as a proof of the Dark Wizard's crime. The centaurs thought for a while, then nodded in agreement, they also wanted the Dark Wizard to be punished. In the end, Bane had another centaur run back to the horde and find some more people to help. In the end, Peter was escorted by the centaurs to Hogwarts, and the remaining centaurs stayed to take care of the animals in the cage and protect the scene from damage. With the horses leading the way, Peter quickly reached the edge of the Forbidden Forest, and behind him was Green, who was trapped in the air, held only by a rope. Peter holds his wand in his right hand and Green's two wands in his left. Okay, Peter, we'll send you here. You take this Dark Wizard to Dumbledore quickly, lest there be an accident. Bane said to Peter. Okay, thank you for sending me back, you can go back first. Peter said gratefully. He had already gotten to know Bane very well along the way, and although these centaurs were xenophobic, they had nothing to do with this little boy who had rescued them. The sorcerer, showing an approachable attitude. You are a friend recognized by our centaurs. In the future, you can play this flute if you need it. We will do our best to complete it. You are also very welcome to our centaurs. Our elders are very much looking forward to meeting with you. Meet you. Bane handed Peter a bone flute, and laughed. Peter took the flute, put it in his backpack solemnly, and said happily, I will be a guest when I have time. I am also very curious about the culture of the centaurs. After saying goodbye to the centaurs, Peter took Green to Hogwarts, but he just walked out of the Forbidden Forest when he bumped into Hagrid, who was returning from the banquet. Hagrid was clearly having a good time at the party, flushing red and humming skulls. Seeing Peter coming out of the Forbidden Forest, Hagrid was stunned for a moment, then said very angrily, Peter, have you gone to the Forbidden Forest? It's already night, and the Forbidden Forest is very dangerous. I want to tell your dean this. Something that will make you remember for a long time. Then he noticed Green, who was being held by Peter and was tied up in midair. He woke up with alcohol and said in a panic, Peter York. What the hell are you doing? Why are you tying Professor Green? Peter looked at the big man and said quickly, Hagrid, calm down first. I don't have time to explain that much to you, you just need to know that Professor Green is a Dark Wizard, and I want to see Dumbledore now. Do you know where he is? Dumbledore, he just sent off the skulls, and he should be in the auditorium now. Hagrid replied instinctively, then came back to his senses and said, you said Professor Green was a Dark Wizard. That's impossible, he's an Auror. Caught a lot of Dark Wizards, how could it be a Dark Wizard? You must be mistaken, put him down. Hearing that Dumbledore was still in the auditorium, Peter dragged Green and ran quickly to the auditorium, leaving Hagrid standing dumbfounded. Then Hagrid, who woke up, also quickly walked back to see what was going on. In the corridor, students came out of the banquet one after another, and then they saw a shocking scene. A student dragged a person floating in the air, not sure whether it was dead or alive, and ran quickly in the corridor. After a closer look, I found that the person floating was their defense against the dark arts Professor Green. Moreover, Professor Green was tied tightly with his body, his right hand was missing, and blood was dripping continuously. The students looked at this scene in horror and avoided Peter, as if he was a tiger. Arriving outside the auditorium gate, Peter ran into the Weasley twins, his eyes lit up, and he hurried towards them, shouting, "George, Fred. Is Dumbledore still inside?" When the twins saw Peter and Professor Green behind them, they were startled for a moment, then ran over quickly and asked in unison, "Peter, what are you doing? Did you kill Professor Green because you didn't like it?" Peter was speechless for a moment. What time is this, and he can still joke? He quickly asked, "Is Dumbledore in there?" "Professor Green is a dark wizard. I need to see Dumbledore." When they heard Peter say that Green was a dark wizard, they both couldn't believe it, but nodded and said, "It's still inside, Professor Flitwick's joke is not over yet, and Dumbledore is listening to his joke. I won't tell you any more, I'll go first." Peter bypassed the two brothers and hurried to the inside. Leaving the twins to look at each other, the two of them looked at each other, and the two brothers who were in the same mind suddenly had an idea. "Fred," Peter said, "Professor Green was a dark wizard. Do you think it's true?" George said. "George, anything is possible at Hogwarts. I wouldn't be surprised if Dumbledore is a woman one day," Fred said with a grin. "So, we believe in Peter 3.2. The twins said in unison. "We're going to see too. Peter versus the dark wizard Professor Green, this is so cool." The two brothers turned around and walked back into the auditorium. The auditorium was almost gone, except for a few scattered students. Dumbledore on the professor's chair was listening to Professor Flitwick's jokes, laughing from time to time. Professor McGonagall was directing several senior students to move the desks and chairs back to their original positions. And the drunk Professor Kettleburn, whispering with his prosthetic arm in his arms. But as soon as Peter came in, everyone's eyes were instantly focused on him and Professor Green behind him. "Merlin, what the hell happened? What's wrong with Professor Green?" Professor McGonagall exclaimed when he saw Professor Green, who was unknowingly behind Peter. Immediately, she noticed that Professor Green was tightly bound by ropes, as well as the amputation of his right hand that was dripping blood, and looked at Peter with a calm face. "Peter York, can you tell me why Professor Green is bound by ropes? What's with his injuries?" "Minerva, calm down first." Dumbledore appeared next to Professor McGonagall at some point, and he gave Professor Green a close look, then turned to Peter. "Peter, can you tell me what's going on? Why did you tie up Professor Green and put stunning and petrifying charms on him?" Professor Green is a dark wizard. He secretly hunts and sells magical animals in the Forbidden Forest." Peter explained everything Green did in detail. Some of his own details were slightly blurred a bit. "You said that Professor Green sold magical animals and attacked you with the death curse," Professor McGonagall exclaimed, his eyes full of disbelief. In her eyes, Professor Green was a bit rigid, but he was still a respected old Auror. Dumbledore looked serious, stared at Peter and asked, "Peter, you know that if you slander your teacher, you will be severely punished. You need proof that what you said is true. Otherwise, it is impossible for us to suspect that an Auror who has been conscientious in his job for decades, not to mention that he is still a professor in our school." Peter directly handed out the two wands in his left hand and said, "This is Green's wand, and one of them is a spare wand. I remember there was a flashback spell that could tell us what magic the wand used before. Professor, you can try these two wands." "Good knowledge," Dumbledore praised, and took the wand. After looking at it carefully, he pointed to one of them and said, "This wand is indeed Professor Green's." Immediately after a flashback spell, the top of the wand suddenly showed a creepy green light. "Merlin, it's the Deathstroke." Professor McGonagall recognized the black magic in the flashback charm, covering his mouth with a terrified look in his eyes. Then she turned to Dumbledore and asked, "Headmaster, this is a serious matter. A professor has cast an unforgivable curse on a student. What should be done?" Dumbledore looked at the wand with a very serious expression, and said solemnly, "This means we need to notify the Minister of Magic. This matter involves international animal trafficking, and the person involved is both Auror and Professor, and it is destined to be restless. now. Minerva, I need to trouble you to notify Minister Millicent Barnold and Amelia Burns from the legal division. We need them to come over. Professor McGonagall nodded and left the auditorium directly. Then Dumbledore waved the Elder Wand directly, and a cloud of silver gas shot out from the wand, forming a round silver ball. Dumbledore said to the silver ball, Severus, please come to my office and bring Veritaserum. Peter watched as Dumbledore finished speaking to a silver ball, and the silver ball went straight through the wall and disappeared. He said in surprise, Headmaster Dumbledore, this should be the Guardian Charm. But I've never seen this spell before. And the message function. This is a little trick I came up with. After all, when the elderly always have physical inconvenience, they can call others at any time. Dumbledore said proudly. Then he looked at Green, who was hovering in midair, sighed and said, I originally thought that Green, the old Auror, would come to teach you defense against the dark arts, but he had a purpose. Peter looked at Green coldly. If it wasn't for the system points, he would have directly set fire to the fire, and dared to use the death curse on him. As long as he got points, he would have a way to make it disappear. Following Dumbledore to the door of the principal's office, Dumbledore looked at the statue of the griffin in front of him and muttered to himself, which is the secret word for opening the door. Oh, by the way, it's pineapple candied fruit. Oh, my memory has declined as I get older. This is the first time Peter has come to the principal's office. The round office walls are covered with photos of previous principals. There are many delicate silverware on the slender-legged table, whirling and spraying purple mist. On a shelf behind the desk stood the sorting hat, and in a glass case was an ornate silver sword. And across the table, there is a tall gilded perch with a phoenix standing on it. As soon as Peter came in, the photo on the wall opened, his eyes half squinted, and one of the gray-haired ladies saw Peter and shouted happily, Little guy, what's your name? What a handsome guy. Hello, Principal Dailies. I'm Peter York, a first-year Slytherin student. Nice to meet you. Peter greeted her. He had seen her introduction in Hogwarts, A School History. The therapist, her portrait hangs in the principal's office and St. Mungo's Hospital, and can move freely between the two portraits. What a polite little guy. What are you doing in the principal's office? Did you make a mistake? Doris asked very kindly. You're from Slytherin. How come I've never heard of the York family? You're a half-blood. An old wizard with a smart face and a goatee in the portrait interjected, his voice full of disgust. Headmaster Black, I'm a Muggle wizard. My parents are Muggles. I'm sorry to disappoint you. Peter smiled at the old wizard. The Phineas Black, known as the most unpopular headmaster in Hogwarts history, was a radical pure blood. Slytherin is getting more and more depraved, and even let the hemp wizards come in. It's not as good as when I was the principal. Phineas Black said, squinting. I remember Headmaster Black, you are the most unpopular headmaster ever at Hogwarts. If you were to be the current headmaster, I'm afraid the school would be disbanded. Peter replied directly with a smile. You rude brat, I'm the principal, you have to learn to respect. Principal Blake glared angrily. Ha ha, Phineas, you were scolded by the students. You also have today. Another squatty principal laughed. Dumbledore walked in, holding the other end of Green's rope in his hand, and said with a smile, it seems that you and the principals are having a good time chatting. Peter thought to himself, which eye did you see that I was having a good time with them? Dumbledore directly transformed into a golden red chair and invited, sit down first, we have to wait for a while. What do you want to drink? Tea or pumpkin juice? Peter looked at the Gryffindor-style chair, raised his eyebrows, took out his wand and clicked on the chair. The chair instantly turned silver green, then sat down and said, tea, thank you. Among the first-year students, you are the best transfiguration I have ever seen. Dumbledore praised, even I, or Minerva, didn't have the talent you have. Professor, you are so ridiculous. My current polymorphism can only transform between dead things, and there are dead things becoming living things becoming living things, and even the most advanced animagus, these I haven't learned yet. Peter said humbly, not thinking of himself as a genius at all. The corners of Dumbledore's mouth twitched. He only thought that this classmate was too Versailles. He was only a first-year student, and he had only been exposed to magic for a few months. If he was more powerful, would he have to give him the position of the principal? Dumbledore knocked on the table in front of Peter, and a cup of black tea appeared. then took a box of sugar cubes from the box beside him, and asked, "How much do I need?" "I usually need 7 sugar cubes, that makes me feel good." Don't need to try. $2 will do, thanks." Peter quickly rejected Dumbledore's offer. "Add so much sugar cubes, I'm afraid you're not drinking sugar water." "Dumbledore, who are you trying to interrogate? Use the Patronus charm to remind me that I'm just making potions, and I can't be distracted." 33 The wooden door of the principal's office was pushed open with a bang, and Snape walked in angrily and said. Then I saw the 2 people sitting in the office, their expressions were stunned, and then they asked, "Are you going to ask my students with Veritaserum?" Hearing this, Dumbledore couldn't help laughing, and said, "Severus, am I that kind of person in your heart? This makes me so sad." "Who said that?" Snape snorted, then turned to look at Peter and asked, "What is the serious thing you're talking about? And what does it have to do with my students?" Peter found the strange Professor Green tonight, followed him, and found that Professor Green was selling magical animals. Dumbledore repeated what Peter said, and then pointed to the ground lying on the ground. Green said, "In order to hide this, Green used the death curse on Peter. This is very serious. I have asked Professor McGonagall to contact the minister and the director of the legal department, and it should be coming soon." After listening to Dumbledore's words, Snape was also surprised, and then looked at Green on the ground as if he were looking at a dead man. Then he came to Peter, looked at him carefully, and after confirming that he was not injured, he directly taunted, "I never knew Mr. York, who is of Gryffindor blood, so eager to find death. Or we Slytherin can no longer tolerate your curiosity. In such a hurry to track down an experienced old Auror, you will be lucky if you are not hit by the life-suppressing curse. When you go back, copy me the Slytherin code 100 times." When Peter heard this, he immediately grimaced. Slytherin didn't know which class of ghosts came up with it, and used a long veil to write the Slytherin rules. Although Snape didn't like to deduct credits from his own academy students, he made a mistake. My favorite is to punish students for copying that stinky and long code. Dumbledore looked at the 2 of them with interest, as if he hadn't heard Snape's slap on Gryffindor in his words. It was the first time he had seen Snape take a student so seriously. Peter was uncomfortable with Professor Snape's stern eyes, and quickly changed the subject. "Principal, should we heal the wound on Professor Green's hand first, or if we keep bleeding like this, will we die?" Quote. Snape snorted at Peter's attempt to change the subject, then walked over to Professor Green, raised his severed wrist with his feet in disgust, turned his head and said in a satisfied tone, "Your cutting spell works well. Cut off his entire hand directly. Where is his palm? If you don't connect it, you will be disabled in the future." "Ah, I seem to have been forgotten in the Forbidden Forest. I was full of fear at the time, so I only took Professor Green and his wand with me when I left, and I forgot to take the severed palm." Peter looked innocent. In fact, the palm of the hand, it is estimated that it has been eaten by the 8-eyed giant spider in the cage at this moment. Snape had a look that could see through him, and sneered, "You have the guts to stop the professor, and even beat and caught him, so you'd forget his palm in fear." Believe it or not, Peter looked like I believed it or not, and sat in his seat drinking tea silently. "Ah, Minister, they're coming," Dumbledore said suddenly. As soon as he finished speaking, 3 people appeared in the fireplace of the principal's office, 2 of whom were older women and the other was a younger man. Dumbledore smiled and opened his hands to welcome. "Welcome to the 2 ladies, and this gentleman. Due to the urgency of the matter, I had to call you all over the night." The middle-aged lady at the head was wrapped in a purple turban, and her face was somewhat dignified. She asked, "Dumbledore, I received a message from you all night long, saying that a dark wizard was caught. Where is he now?" Dumbledore didn't say much. Instead, he pointed to Green lying on the ground and said, "That is the dark wizard. He hunted precious magical animals in the Forbidden Forest, and planned to smuggle them out of Hogwarts to sell. After one of our students found out, he directly attacked the students with a life-threatening curse. The plot is very bad. I need you to come and witness together." 39. The 3 newcomers looked at the bound people on the ground, and among them the young wizard shouted in surprise, "Saraglin. How could it be him?" The female minister, Millicent Barnold, was not very familiar with Green, and asked the wizard, "Roger, do you know this dark wizard power?" The wizard named Rog said in disbelief, "This is impossible, Minister. Green is a retiree of our Aurors. He has captured many dark wizards before. How can it be a dark wizard? The female minister turned her head seriously and asked Dumbledore, Dumbledore, please explain, what evidence do you have to prove that this old Auror is a dark wizard? Otherwise, even if you are the greatest wizard, we will never allow it. Someone smeared the honor of a member of the Ministry of Magic. Backquote, come here, Peter. Dumbledore called to Peter, and then explained, it was this student of mine who discovered Green's secret. He quietly followed him to the depths of the Forbidden Forest and discovered Green's secret base. There are magical creatures captured by Green. After listening to Dumbledore's words, everyone looked at the boy who was only 11 or 12 years old in amazement. It was this kid who caught Green, an old Auror. This is too far-fetched. The short-haired witch, who had been silent for a while, asked, Saraglin is the old Auror of the Ministry of Magic. He has a pension. Why would he take such a risky thing? Ma'am, after finding me, Professor Green decided that I couldn't escape from his grasp. He told me that he owed the goblin 10,000 galleons. And he has an international trafficking line, so he wants to sell fantastic beasts in the Forbidden Forest, get money. Peter said yes, and it seems that the goblins have a secret he doesn't know about and threaten him to pay back the money as soon as possible. If you still can't believe it, please come and see these two wands first. Both wands are Grimm's. You can use the flashback charm to find out. Dumbledore picked up the two wands on the table, handed to Minister Millicent Barnold, as well as Ms. Amelia Burns, the short-haired legal director. The two took the wands and used the flashback charm, and immediately a terrifying green light of the life-slaying charm flashed back on both wands. The two ladies almost didn't hold their wands. Merlin, I thought that since the Dark Lord disappeared, no one will use this terrible spell anymore. I didn't expect someone to use it again, and it was against a child. It's crazy, Minister Millicent Nord exclaimed, and then said with a serious face, the impact of this incident is very bad. After finding the evidence, it must be severely punished, and it must not be forgiven lightly. As one of the most powerful ministers of the Ministry of Magic, since she was appointed Minister of Magic in 1980, she insisted that the Aurors gain the power to use the unforgivable curse on the Death Eaters, and after Voldemort disappeared, she forcefully placed many pure bloods, the Death Eaters of the family, are imprisoned in Azkaban. Over the years, after the Death Eaters were caught and disappeared, everything in the magic world was calm. There has not been such a serious incident in a long time, and the protagonist is still an old Auror from the Ministry of Magic. The reputation of the department has been seriously affected. As Minister Millicent Barnold, she has decided to step down after a few years, so she will never allow a taint in her political career. She looked at Green lying on the ground in disgust, and said to Dumbledore, I need to use your office as a makeshift interrogation room. Please, ma'am. Dumbledore nodded happily, and then said, I've asked Professor Snape to bring the Veritaserum. When Green wakes up, he can take it and he should know what happened. Thank you, Dumbledore. Minister Millicent Barnold greeted Dumbledore, then stepped aside and said to Amelia Burns, you are the chief of the legal division, and Burns will be judged tonight. The director is in charge, Rog is the recorder, and the others are members of the observation team. When everyone was ready, Dumbledore directly lifted the spell on Green's body and gave a quick recovery spell to wake him up. Ah, beast, you actually hurt me. I want, Minister. Why are you here? Green, who had been in a coma, roared as soon as he woke up, and then I found that I was no longer in the Forbidden Forest, surrounded by people, and in front of him was the Minister of Magic with a serious face. I was stunned. As the person in charge of this trial, Amelia Burns saw Green sober and asked directly and solemnly, Saraglin, Peter York accuses you of selling the Forbidden Forest magical beasts and cast the unforgivable curse on him. Do you agree? What? Green was dumbfounded for a moment. He was just thinking about a prosperous future in the Forbidden Forest, and now he has become a criminal. As an experienced Auror, he immediately pretended to be innocent, and was wronged with justice. He said with a sullen expression, Director, this is slander. I am an Auror, how could I do this? I just have a personal grudge with Peter York, and he slanders me like that. You can't listen to partiality. Minister Millicent Barnold saw that Green was still arguing, and directly took out two wands and said, Then you mean that these two wands are not yours? We have already tried the flashback charm. Green, you are proud Luo, you should know what that means. Are you still saying that you didn't put the life-threatening spell on your wand? Green saw his two wands, his pupils shrank, and then continued to quibble. I admit that one of the wands is mine, but it doesn't prove that I used the death charm. I was in a coma for so long, it may be someone used my wand to release the death-killing spell, and then framed me. Minister, you also know that I have caught many dark wizards and offended many people over the years. Professor Green, only I and Headmaster Dumbledore have touched your wand while you're in a coma. I'm sure I can't have such advanced black magic at such a young age. Are you suspecting that Dumbledore framed you? He's the greatest wizard. Why would you do that? Peter interjected, asking Green with an innocent look on his face. Dumbledore, who was silently watching, twitched at the corners of his mouth. This little guy actually put his name on it in order to convict Green. He really deserves to be a student of Slytherin. When Green saw Peter, hatred and fear flashed in his eyes, and then he said excitedly, I suspect that Peter York is not human at all. Before I was knocked out, I saw him directly transformed into a giant of more than 10 meters. Just like a bird snake. Check it out. Check him out. Everyone looked at Green like an idiot, and Snape sneered directly, I don't think he needs to be convicted, his brain is probably broken, and he is already talking nonsense. What else can Peter York be if he is not a human? Weird. Green, are you sure you want to continue to mess around? Plead not guilty. Amelia Burns, director of the legal department, asked again, and then said solemnly, it seems that we can only ask with Veritaserum. Director ACDC Green is an old Auror, and the elites of the Aurors are trained to resist Veritaserum. Even if they take Veritaserum, I'm afraid they won't know anything. The young wizard Rog reminded. Everyone was suddenly disappointed. If he couldn't confess his guilt, there would be no way to convict Green. And Green, who was bound, also flashed a smug look in his eyes, and he said, I'm wrong. Looking at this situation, Snape stepped forward, took out a small bottle of colorless liquid, and said with a sneer, don't worry, I just prepared a potent Veritaserum which is much stronger than your inferior potions. Just one drop can make the most determined person reveal the secrets of his heart. Minister Millicent happily took the potion, then looked at Green, who looked surprised, and said to his assistant Rog, give him 2 drops, because 1 drop is not enough to ask questions. When Snape heard the minister's words, he was a little unhappy about her questioning his potion level, and after feeding 2 drops, he reminded gloatingly, let's just ask, I'm a potent Veritaserum, 1 drop is enough to make it worse. Anyone who speaks the truth. If 2 drops are taken, it may become unbearable and become a fool. The wizard's assistant Rog said angrily, why didn't you say it just now? Just reminded now. I already said that taking 1 drop is enough, but your minister doesn't believe it. Snape didn't get used to him, and replied directly. Okay, let's hurry up and ask. Amelia Burns interrupted, if the Veritaserum is too effective, people will become stupid later. Our time is short. At this time, Green, who was taking Veritaserum, fell into a special state of sedation and sat dazedly. What's your name? Amelia Burns first asked simply, wanting to see the efficacy of Veritaserum. Saraglin. Green replied. Did you hunt magical animals in the Forbidden Forest? Did you use the Deathstroke on Peter York? Amelia asked seriously after confirming the effect of the medicine. Yes, Peter York found out about my animal trafficking, so I decided to silence him. Green replied unconsciously. As soon as they heard Green's words, even if they already knew that it was him, everyone was still shocked by Green's quick silence. Director Amelia frowned when she heard the words, and then asked inexplicably, even if he is discovered, as long as a forgetting spell can make him forget you. Why do you want to kill people and silence them? Hogwarts has Dumbledore, and I'm not sure he can bring the forgotten memories back. If found, my hidden secrets will be found, and I will be locked up in Azkaban for the rest of my life. So there will be no future troubles. Green's eyes are confused, and he said in a daze. As soon as she heard that there was still a secret, Amelia hurriedly asked, what's the deepest secret you have besides selling animals? Hearing the question, Green's face showed a trace of struggle, and then he fell into unconsciousness and replied, my deepest secret is that I was once caught by Death Eaters, but the Dark Lord let me go. He let me. I continue to hide in the Ministry of Magic and tell the Death Eaters where the Aurors are. This way the Aurors will always be 1 step behind the Death Eaters. As soon as the words fell, the principal's office fell into silence, and everyone was shocked by the news. Minister Millicent's wand fell to the ground in shock, and the wizard's assistant's automatic feather note directly drew a long ink mark on the notebook. "Merlin," Amelia exclaimed, not expecting that it was just a dark wizard's interrogation, but the Death Eaters were involved. And it was the traitor that the Death Eaters planted in the Ministry of Magic. As a powerful minister who dared to formally declare war on the Death Eaters during Voldemort's prosperous period, Millicent Barnold heard the name of the Death Eaters again at this time. It was like a lifetime. Immediately, he said to Amelia Burns with a serious expression, "Director Burns, you ask him, since when did he work for the Death Eaters? Why is there no Death Eater mark on his arm?" Quote, "I was caught in ambush by Death Eaters in a 1978 pursuit. They brought me to the Dark Lord. He was so powerful that nothing I could think of was in front of him." Hiding, Green returned to the road unconsciously, and then smiled madly. "The Dark Lord let me go, and promised to give me wealth and status in the future, and after taking control of the Ministry of Magic, he will take over the Aurors Division. Give me the long position. I have done a lot of credit for the dark magic, but I have never received the mark of honor bestowed by the Dark Lord. He thinks that I work in the Ministry of Magic, and the existence of the mark is not conducive to my hiding. But I didn't expect that the mighty Dark Lord would be defeated by a 1-year-old child." Although Green was unconscious, the emotions on his face kept changing. After the Dark Lord disappeared, the Death Eaters fled in all directions, and many were killed by God Azkaban. "I've been worrying about being found out all day too. Especially in the past many times when the Aurors arrested the Death Eaters escaped early. Then the Longbottom and his wife, who are also Aurors, became suspicious of me." Green's face showed a grin, "So I revealed their whereabouts to Lestrange and the others. It's a pity that the Longbottoms were just tortured mad and didn't die." Peter was shocked when he heard Green's words. He didn't expect that it was just an animal trafficking case involving the Death Eaters, and there was also the matter of the Longbottom and his wife being besieged and tortured by the Death Eaters. "You must know that the Longbottoms were originally the Aurors of the Ministry of Magic, but after Voldemort suddenly disappeared, they were caught by the unwilling Lestranges and other Death Eaters, who tortured them crazy with the Cruciatus. In St. Mungo's Hospital, unrecognizable family. Oh, poor Frank and Alice, they had waited to win." Amelia Burns, who had a better relationship with the Longbottoms, was extremely distressed. Now when he heard that Green was the one responsible, he said to him with hatred, "It's because of you, a despicable and shameless guy, they are tortured and mad. They don't even recognize their favorite child. You are so." Dumbledore's always calm face, at this time, showed an expression of grief that he had never seen before, and said in a deep voice, "I once went to see Frank and Emily. Their child Neville often visits his parents, but they no longer know each other. He is." As the original members of the Order of the Phoenix founded by Dumbledore, the Longbottom and his wife have always been Dumbledore's right-hand man. At this time, when they heard that Green was the one who caused the Longbottom and his wife to be killed, the eyes of Green showed a terrifying indifference. "Dumbledore, and everyone. Now, it's no longer just about dark wizards, hunting animals and using the unforgivable curse. It's about the Death Eaters and the killing of the Longbottoms." Minister Millie Sembenard said very seriously, "We need to bring Green back to the Ministry of Magic for a public trial. Let this sinner get the punishment he deserves." "I agree to your request, Millicent, and it's time to give the Longbottoms an explanation." Dumbledore nodded. "Minister, look, what's going on with Green?" Roger, the wizard's assistant, said in a panic. "I saw Green twitching all over, foaming at the mouth, and looking like he was about to die. It's just that Veritaserum is so powerful that his body can't take it. Don't worry, he won't die, he's just turned into an idiot." Snape said gloatingly. "Become an idiot? We still need a public trial at the Ministry of Magic. What a question can an idiot ask?" Amelia Burns said angrily, then pleading, looking at Snape, who was watching a good show, "Professor Snape, you made the Veritaserum just now, you must have a way to save him, please help." Looking at Snape's face, Dumbledore sighed and persuaded Snape, "Severus, you'd better help. For the sake of the Longbottoms being your colleagues, they need a result." Quote 0. Hearing Dumbledore's words, Snape still listened, took out a vial, and threw it to the wizard's assistant. "Take it to him, and the symptoms will be relieved. You can't become an idiot, but don't even think about a complete cure." After taking the antidote, Green's condition was relieved, and the effect of Veritaserum also disappeared. Green regained consciousness again, but this time he looked desperate. He clearly remembered the process of the interrogation just now. Now that his deepest secrets have been dug up, he is facing ruin and imprisonment. Headmaster Dumbledore, we'll take the prisoners back first, and when the trial is called, I'll ask you to come over. Minister Millicent said. Then he turned to look at Peter on the side, smiled and said, your name is Peter York, right? It's amazing to be able to catch such a powerful dark wizard at such a young age. We will also invite you as a witness during the trial. You have to be mentally prepared. My phoenix has helped me a lot. In order to save me, he was hit with a life-threatening curse from Green. Now he is Nirvana, Peter said with a clever appearance, and then took out the phoenix in his pocket and handed it to everyone to see, said aggrievedly, Professor Green will be punished, right? He attacked us frantically and used a lot of evil spells. I almost died. The fact that Peter owns the phoenix is limited to spreading at Hogwarts. When the three ministers saw the phoenix that they must win, they were surprised and looked down on the little wizard who could catch Green. Thanks for watching, please like and subscribe.